All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started a little bit early. We're going to be doing this about 15 minutes early from our normal start time because we have a relatively short episode of Tech Thursdays. There's not a whole lot to talk about. We're basically going to spend most of this stream talking about the crazy stuff that happened over the past week regarding the RTX 5090 and 5080. And then we're also going to talk about the mobile CPUs because there's a lot of new mobile parts that are launching this year. AMD's launching Fire Range next month. Intel Arrow Lake HX is also coming out. So basically the high-end, the higher tier, higher wattage laptop parts are coming out from both AMD and Intel. So we're going to be talking a lot about that on this stream. In particular, the two that I just mentioned, but there's also Ryzen AI Max, also known as Strix Halo. There are probably a couple more different SKUs that are coming out later this year. I don't know of any besides the two that were announced from Asus and HP. But that's what we have pretty much lined up for this week. We're going to have a lot of interesting stories regarding the laptops as well as the RTX 5090 and RTX 5080. So let's go ahead and get started here. So to start things off, let's look at the first one here. This is a supply chain story from WCCF Tech. This comes from WCCF Tech. This was posted February 2nd. So the nvidia RTX 5090 could take up to 16 weeks. So if you guys remember, I was telling you guys that if you can't get one of these on launch day, you're going to have to wait until April. Remember I said April. 16 weeks is actually more than April. That's like 4 months. So you're talking February, that's 4 weeks right there. March is another 4 weeks, you're at 8 weeks. April, you add 5 more, that puts you at, you know, like well into May when these actually start showing up in greater supply. So it's not like it's impossible to get one between now and Q2. It's just extremely, extremely hard to get one because the supply is super low right now. The other thing is the RTX 5080, same thing. It says this one will come back sooner, and that's to be expected because the RTX 5080 is easier to produce. It is a smaller chip. It is a much weaker GPU, so that one shouldn't be too hard to get. I think if someone wants a 5080, it's really not that hard. You probably can get one. If you live near a micro center, it's really not that hard. You just have to keep checking the website every day, every morning, every afternoon, and you should be able to get one if you really want the 5080. That being said, I think that the only people that are really going to want the 5080 are the people who are either on RTX 30 series or anything older, so like 20 series, 10 series, the old AMD stuff like the 5700 XT, those sort of cards, Vega 64, all that stuff, the 5080 is a massive improvement over any of those. But if you're on 40 series, the 50 series is actually like a massive skip. Like, you're not really missing out on anything, to be honest, with skipping 50 series for those of you that are on RTX 40 series or on the AMD Radeon 7000 series, because those GPUs are offering very good value. If somebody bought into one of those GPUs last year or even like a month ago or even 2 years ago at this point, you probably are pretty much set to skip this generation. The 5080 is not offering that much. It's like 10% faster than a 7900 XTX, but it has like way less VRAM. So it's probably not a very good investment if you're already on a flagship GPU from the previous generation. And then the 5090 is really the only one that is worth considering, although there are so many caveats with it, considering the power consumption, considering the power supply, the transient loads, the heat that it generates while gaming. Like, there's a lot of, questionable things about the 5090 that you're really not missing out a whole lot if you skip this generation. Let's put it this way. The people who are going to skip the 50 series and wait until the 60 series, or wait until AMD's new flagship successor to the XTX, which comes out next year, like, if you wait for those, you're going to feel a lot better about upgrading to the next generation, skipping the 50 series, because 50 series is basically like it's, as far as I'm concerned, 50 series is like, it's like 40 series on steroids. That's literally all it is. And that's why you look at all these other reviewers and they keep on memeing, calling everyone seems to call the 5080 the 4080 Ti. Everyone's calling 5090 4090 Ti. So it's a massive skip. Like, unless you're someone who wants to do like AI stuff and you need the 32 gigabytes that the 5090 offers, like, it's really not, I don't really see it as a gaming graphics card, to be honest. It's too much electricity. It's not practical to use as a gaming device for several hours at a time, but yet I can see it as a good, like, prosumer workstation GPU that can do a lot of stuff with AI. That's kind of how I see the RTX 5090. And then 5080 is definitely a gaming graphics card, but like I said, the only people that are going to benefit, the only people that are going to feel like it was worth spending that much money, because let's face it, you're typically going to spend $1,200 or more on a 5080 unless you somehow manage to get the Best Buy Founders Edition at MSRP, or one of the Zotacs that also sell for MSRP. Unless you're one of the people that can get one of those, you're most likely going to be paying around $1,200 or more for a 5080. So in order to justify that kind of spend, you better be on like a 30 series card or something older. Otherwise, it's kind of a side grade, to be honest, compared to like 40 series and AMD's 7000 series. So, yeah, so we're not going to be seeing a lot of these for a while. Like, the supply is super short. So that's going to be that one for this article. And then here's another one that's interesting. So the the GeForce RTX 5080, somebody purchased a 5080 and it was mislabeled as a 5090. Here's the other thing that's interesting. This article is an example of all the weird stuff that I keep hearing about regarding these graphics cards. Like, I don't think I've ever heard of all the, like, the last time stuff like this happened, I can't even remember when stuff like this happened, like mislabeled graphics cards. So in this scenario, somebody bought a 5080 and they received it, and it's like, okay, the box says 5080. They open the box and the card says RTX 5090. But this is not a 5090. This is a 5080 with the wrong, whatever this like metal or plastic, whatever this cover is, it's mislabeled. It was basically assembled from the factory with the wrong label. It has 5090 label, even though it's nothing more than a 5080. So, yeah, there's other things too. Like somebody in the chat was mentioning that the 5080 got bricked by a driver. I read something about that earlier as well. I can't remember where I saw that. Yeah, that was mentioned. Basically, there was some issue with, like, I don't know what it is. There's another problem too. Like, if you buy a Founders Edition, there is a small chance that you have to RMA it immediately or return it to the store immediately or for an exchange, because there are reports of defective, like, ribbon cables. I don't know if it's actually the ribbon cable or if it's the connector that goes on the back of the PCB, because there are reports of these graphics cards not working properly, and it's not limited to 5080. It can also affect 5090. So that is actually quite scary. So again, another reason why rushing and stressing out trying to buy one of these is really not worth it. Like, anyone who's on 40 series is probably just sitting back and relaxing right now at all the mess of problems that are surrounding the RTX 50 series launch, because this stuff is hilarious. Like defective PCBs or ribbon cables on Founders Edition, cards getting bricked because of a driver update. I don't even understand how that's even possible. Cards getting mislabeled. We haven't even talked about the potential fire hazard on the 5090 because of the fact that it pulls close to 600 watts while gaming, which is unheard of. That's not how the 4090 worked. And the 4090, we all know about those melted connectors. So the 5090 is at even higher risk of catching fire on the connector or melting the connector down. So if anyone is sticking this in a case that does not have good airflow, they are running a huge risk of, like, burning their computer or causing a fire or something catastrophic. So yeah, like I said, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything by skipping this generation. It doesn't, like, there's also the eBay, there's also the scalpers all over eBay. You can see right now, people are trying to sell the RTX 5090 Founders Edition for almost $10,000. So there's currently one on sale for, the buy it now is $9,500. The starting bid is $6,500. Some of the stuff are like scams. It's people that are trying to scam the bots, which is an honorable thing that they're doing. But there's also people that are just straight up scalping. Like, they're literally just reselling these and trying to flip them on eBay and Amazon Marketplace. So don't buy one of these from Amazon. You're most likely buying it off of a scalper. And don't buy these off of eBay because you're obviously buying one from a scalper. So, and do not reinforce that behavior. The scalper market, like, do not contribute to that. Like, that's just not helping. Yeah, so that's the state of the union on RTX 5090 and RTX 5080. You see a lot of videos with the F8. We already know that. We know that from the review. Like, everybody knows that the Founders Edition memory runs at 95 degrees Celsius. We literally talked about that last week when we did the reviews. We went through all the reviews. All the reviews already know that the Founders Edition is the worst one in terms of cooling. There's nothing you can do to fix that. It's basically going to run at 96, 95 degrees, and it's going to cook itself. So, yeah. If you really want one of these, do not buy the Founders Edition. Do not buy the Founders Edition. You're at risk of burning up the VRAM and having to do an RMA. You're also at risk of getting a defective card that can't handle PCI Gen 5, so you get black flickering screen on the monitor, and you'll have no idea what's going on, when in reality it's because the card is defective. There is no driver fix for that. There is no firmware fix for that. That is literally a hardware problem. It requires a return or an RMA. 100% guaranteed. So, very, very bad launch. This series, 50 series in general, is probably going to go down in NVIDIA's corporate history as one of the worst product generations that they ever made. Like, let's be honest here. 5090 is a walking fire hazard. 5080 And 5090 Founders Editions are loud. The memory runs hot, at least on the 5090, because it uses too much electricity. It generates way too much heat. It's a mini thermonuclear reactor. And also the fact that the ribbon cables on some of these Founders Editions are straight up defective and can't handle PCI Gen 5. So, yeah. That means you cannot use Founders Edition with a vertical riser. You cannot vertically mount the Founders Edition card. So please do not buy the Founders Edition card. If you truly want one of these for whatever reason, I have no idea. It better not be for gaming, especially if it's a 5090. If it's a 5080, it can be for gaming. But the 5090, you should not be buying a 5090 for gaming. I'm dead serious. This should be bought for AI. Like, you're opening yourself up to like a fire hazard if you're going to be using a 5090 for gaming for like 8 hours a day. Or you're just going to like fry the card. It's that simple. You're going to burn up the memory, or you're going to, I don't know, like maybe the riser cable can't handle, not the riser cable, the cable in the actual card can't handle the Gen 5. So it's probably going to wear out due to the heat cycles. That's my guess. So very, very bad product. It's very disappointing. I don't even know how we got here. Like, I don't understand why NVIDIA launched this the way they did. First of all, there's no supply. So I have no idea why they launched it in January. They literally could have waited until April to launch this, and I think everyone would have been fine. They could have done more testing with the cables or something, because they've got some manufacturing problems. Not only are they having very, very bad yields on the 5090 die itself, which is one of the reasons why the supply is so constrained, they're also having defective parts when they assemble the card. So, really, really bad launch. Let's see. So in other news, let's change topics here. Instead of talking about the 50 series, let's talk about 40 series. So NVIDIA cuts the GeForce. Okay, here's another like big brain decision from NVIDIA. Although this one makes a lot of sense, if we're being honest. NVIDIA decided to cut the supply of the RTX 4060, basically their best-selling 40 series GPU. They decided to cut the supply by up to 60% as the GPU gets close to EOL. So this is natural. So there's really nothing here. This is not like a surprise or anything. It's the only reason why it's slightly surprising is the fact that there's really, I don't know, like, they probably know that they can constrain the supply. They already know 50 series is constrained, but, you know, what does the supply for 5060 look like if they're going to cut supply so drastically? But it is going to go EOL, and I think this thing goes EOL in like June or something. So, yeah, 4060, if you really want 4060, don't rush to get a 4060. You'll still be able to get one in March, no problem. April, no problem. These are really the only ones that I see regularly getting restocks on Newegg and Micro Center. So if you really want a 4060 for some weird I don't know who would actually really desire a 4060. The 4060 is probably the least desirable graphics card that I can think of. Like, I would much rather get a 7600 XT, because that thing has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Or I would much rather get an Intel B580, because that has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And it's a lot newer than the 4060. So 4060 is basically complete trash garbage tier as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know who would desire one of these. So yeah, go ahead, NVIDIA. Cut the supply by 60%. Nobody cares. No one that watches this channel actually cares at all about the 4060. So, yeah. Go ahead. EOL it now. I could care less. End of life this thing. Get rid of it. Who cares? It's a 4060. Nobody cares. Boring. Okay, so that was that. Is that all the GPU news we've got? Patrick with the sub. Let's see. What do we got here? There was something I wanted to talk about before we move on to laptops. Oh, there's one more story I have on RTX 50 series. So there are reports. Oh, we talked about this at the very beginning of the stream. So in addition to all the potential problems, potential defective cables on Founders Edition, defective or potential fire hazards on 5090, long term, memory cooking itself on Founders Edition. Basically, all the problems seem to stem from Founders Edition cards. So if you go and get a 5090 or 5080, I highly recommend getting one of the AIB cards. Now, I don't like recommending the AIB cards because they cost more money. Typically, they're going to cost a lot more money versus the Founders Edition cards. However, the Founders Edition cards this generation are so terrible and such trash that I cannot in good faith recommend Founders Edition graphics cards this generation. There's too many issues with them. The memory problems, the cable problems. And for those of you that don't understand when I'm saying cable, I'm not talking about the power cable. Let's be clear. I'm talking about the cable inside the graphics card that you cannot see. The cable that connects the little PCB in the middle of the GPU to the PCIe slot that goes on the motherboard. I'm talking about that cable. That little cable, the ribbon cable, there's a potential that you buy one of these and it's straight up defective. And then you have black screen flickering issues and you have no idea why your brand new GPU is spazzing out. And I can see it now. Someone buys one of these, they spend like $2,000 or $1,000 or whatever, and they're like, oh, I got a wonderful 5090, and it's like, I'm king of the world. They go plug it in, and guess what? Black screen, flickering issues, black screen, flickering issues. What's wrong? What happened? Do I need to upgrade my power supply? So then they go and spend $400 on a 1600 watt Corsair power supply, an AX series. They go and they put the new power supply. They think the power supply fixed the issue. They just threw $400 on a new power supply. Guess what? Black screen, flickering issues. Black screen, flickering issues. They're like, oh, what do I do now? Do I need to buy a new motherboard? They literally buy a $700 Asus Crosshair Hero flagship motherboard. They go buy that. They change the motherboard. Black screen, flickering issues. Black screen, flickering issues. So then now they're like, what? I don't understand. What? The 5090 is so hard. It's so hard to handle. Do I need to buy a new monitor? They go buy a $1,000 4K 240 hertz LG OLED Ultra Gear. Now they spent $1,000 on a monitor. They spent $400 on a power supply. They spent $700 on a motherboard. And guess what? Black screen, flickering issues. Black screen, flickering issues. So it's like, now you can see the frustration that people are going to run into if they buy this GPU and they get unlucky not knowing that the problem is actually not the computer. The problem is actually the graphics card. They have to return the graphics card. They have to RMA the graphics card. But they're so afraid that if they have to return the graphics card, they can't get a replacement because there's literally no stock. Do you see why this will cause people so many headaches and anxiety and just an overall negative feeling around building a gaming computer or whatever the reason why they put this computer together? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's, yeah. And then on top of that, there are reports of bricked 5090 and 5090D are surging, according to widespread user reports from Chinese tech forums and Reddit communities. Multiple RTX 5090 and 5090D are failing permanently after standard driver installations. I have never heard of this happen. First of all, there's no stock. It's so hard to buy one. And then when you do buy one, dice roll, it might just die when you update your drivers. Or if you buy a Founders Edition dice roll again, it might have a defective cable inside. Wonderful. Oh man, talk about Silicon Lottery. Talk about Silicon Lottery. This is the epitome of it in the worst definition possible. Users report consistent failure patterns upon initial driver installation. Displays go dark, and the systems permanently lose the ability to detect the GPU through both the display port and the HDMI interfaces. Hardware failures have been documented. Oh man, you know what this is making me think of? Wow. Man, what is that saying? Pride goeth before a fall. Nvidia has gotten so big and so successful. It was only a matter of time. This is making me think of 2009. This is like the story of 2009. It's so weird how history always somehow manages to repeat itself. It's so weird. Isn't it ironic? The last time Nvidia had a severe hardware defect was in 2009 or 2000. Well, it was 2008, but the lawsuit happened in 2009, if I remember. Yeah, you're right. The problem did start in 2008. Yeah. 2009 was the lawsuit, though, with Apple, between Nvidia and Apple. And guys, this is the reason why Apple, to this day, Apple and Nvidia they're basically exclusive. They're mutually exclusive. You cannot say Apple. It's so weird saying Apple and Nvidia together in the exact same sentence. This is not vocabulary that I have used in more than 10 years. Like saying the word Apple and the word Nvidia in the exact same sentence is basically blasphemy, heresy. It's like being politically incorrect. It's like all these negative things to use those two words in the exact same sentence. So, like Apple never wants to deal with Nvidia because of what happened in 2008 and 2009. And this smells a lot like that. This smells a lot like that. Hardware failures have been documented across because this damaged Apple's brand. Like this was making Apple look bad. And you know how Apple is. Even people who don't like Apple knows exactly how Apple is when it comes to how the public perceives their brand. And hardware failures and Apple is not something that you say in the exact same sentence. You cannot say hardware failures plus Apple. That doesn't happen. That's like a myth. That's a myth. It doesn't happen. But the reality, why doesn't it happen? Because it was not allowed to happen. And the fact that it was happening in 2008 due to a problem with Nvidia is the reason why Apple and Nvidia do not do business with each other anymore. At least not in the consumer market. Not in the GPU and the mobility space. So that's a little bit of a history lesson for those of you that are relatively new to this sort of tech world. But this smells so much like 2008 Nvidia. It is hilarious. And the other, or it's ironic, I should say, because the GTX 280 was very power hungry. It was very power hungry. And it had the problems like this, where it would just kind of like die. Just straight up die. In fact, in some scenarios, I remember some Apple laptops were literally catching on fire. They were turning into a fire hazard. And that was another reason why Nvidia went into litigation, or Apple basically sued Nvidia. That's basically what happened. I don't know what the arbitration was, like how they settled, but to this day, Apple does not deal with Nvidia. They don't want Nvidia in any of their products because Nvidia had hardware failures. And there was like a whole thing like, oh, well, Nvidia tried to deny it, and Apple wanted to, like, Apple did a root cause analysis, and like, hey, it looks like it's your problem. And Nvidia's like, no, we're Nvidia, we're so good. There's no way. It's probably your problem. And they're like, no, actually, it looks like it's an NVIDIA problem. And NVIDIA's like, no, that's impossible. We checked it. It's good. And they're like, no, check it again. It's bad. And they're like, no. So basically, NVIDIA, you know how NVIDIA was doing their blocking and tackling, deflecting? And they're like, no, you guys have to look into this. Otherwise, you're going to get sued. And, they're going to be hearing from Apple's lawyers. And NVIDIA was like, oh, okay, now hold on a second. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And then they found, sure enough, there was a problem with NVIDIA. So, sure enough, it's so obvious in this story that it's a problem with NVIDIA. So here we go. Some investigations point to PCI Gen 5 implementation as a possible root cause. The 5090 series represents NVIDIA's first fully Gen 5 compliant architecture, introducing new signal integrity challenges. Some users report temporary mitigation by forcing... Oh, so this is related to the... this is related to the Founders Edition. This can't be a problem with AIB cards, then. I have a feeling this might be Founders Edition only. I bought a 5090. It is not detected on Windows and Device Manager. My motherboard is a strict... Okay, here's the thing, guys. I bet the... Okay, one way to rule this as a Gen 5 problem is to look at the motherboard. It all depends on the type of motherboard they're using. So in this first one, this guy's using a ROG Strix B650E-F. You know what's even more alarming about this problem? If this is a problem with PCI Gen 5, if somebody buys a 5090 and they install it in an older motherboard that can't even do Gen 5, they may not even know that their card is defective until they upgrade their motherboard. That's scary because think of it like this. If you have a 15-day or 30-day return window with Best Buy, but let's say you installed this card in an older motherboard, like let's say you have a 5800 X3D, which is on an AM4 motherboard, which is only going to be PCI Gen 4. You install it into that. It's only going to be Gen 4. So you might think, oh, my card's fine. It doesn't have any issues. So you keep the card, and then like 2 months later, like let's say the 9950 X3D comes out in March. So now you want to upgrade to the 9950 X3D and get a brand new motherboard, DDR5, all the good stuff. And so you go and do that. Now, when you plug it into a Gen 5 motherboard, let's say you get, like an Asus Hero or Aorus Master or who knows, the Godlike, whatever. Doesn't matter. You get a Gen 5 motherboard. You plug it in, guess what? Issues. It gets bricked, or issues with stability. It's not working. It's flickering. How come it worked in my old motherboard? Why is it not working in my new motherboard? So you try to replace your motherboard. Guess what? Same problem on the exact same newer motherboard. Because the problem is not the motherboard. So this is going to create so many layers of complexity for the average person who doesn't know enough about the technology. So my word of advice, if you buy a 5090 Founders Edition card, specifically, or 5080 Founders Edition card, you must be on a Gen 5 motherboard. That way you can rule out if your card is defective within the return window, because no one wants to deal with an RMA, especially since these are in such short supply. So yeah, I can see it now. There's just going to be so many people that are going to be oblivious to this problem because they're going to be on like a Gen 4 motherboard and they don't know that their card is actually defective, like it can't actually handle Gen 5. It's probably that cable. It's probably the cable. And this is probably a problem specific to the Founders Edition. I would be very surprised if this problem is happening on AIB cards that use the standard PCIe connector, like there's no ribbon cable. I would be very surprised. Okay, let's put it this way. If this is happening on AIB cards, then NVIDIA has a serious problem, because then it's not actually fully isolated to the cable. It could be an actual defect with the chip, or the way they've implemented the circuitry for the PCIe, something along there might actually be defective or problematic. And here it says third-party vendor. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Hardware failures have been documented across multiple boards. Okay, never mind. It's not necessarily the cable then. Colorful, Manly, and Gigabyte cards showing identical symptoms. Third-party vendor reports sometimes indicate potential integrated circuit burn damage, suggesting hardware level failure rather than recoverable software issues. So yeah, this is, wow. Man, this is like, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. This is definitely not a driver problem. Well, no, this is not a driver problem. This is a hardware, this is a firmware problem, if anything. But I think it's probably a hardware defect with some of the components that they're using for the Gen 5 signaling or something along those lines. This is not good. Yeah, this is like, man, this is a huge skip. This is a huge skip. Skip this generation. This is terrible. I can't wait till 5080 Ti. 5080 Ti is going to come in and be the hero. I can see it now. 5090 is stupid expensive, stupid power consumption, fire hazard, just very overall bad. It's just bad news. 5080 is weak. It is so weak. 5080 Ti, we need you desperately right now. 5080 Ti, if you're out there, if you hear me, we need the 5080 Ti to save the world. Seriously. 5080 Ti is the only one. 5080 Ti at like $1,200 MSRP is going to be the hero. It's going to be the hero because it's not going to use stupid amounts of electricity. It's going to come with 24 gigabytes of VRAM. So it's not going to be some weak sauce, overpriced 16 gigabyte garbage. It's not going to be some stupid, I'm going to melt your house and burn it down and hope you have fire insurance 5090. It's not going to be that kind of nonsense. You know, like, it needs to be that middle ground graphics card that is excellent for gaming, good value for the performance, acceptable power consumption, acceptable noise, and it's got 24 gigabytes of VRAM. That is going to be 5080 Ti. This generation desperately needs a 5080 Ti. Seriously. And it needs to come out after they figure out all this stupid nonsense that they got going on with burn damage on ICs and all kinds of stuff, and Gen 5 not working, and bricking cards on driver installs. Yeah, dude, 50 series is a joke right now. This is a joke. I am so glad I did not waste $2,000 on this utter garbage, because this is a joke. Jeez. It'll cost like $40.90. Yeah, but it'll be good. 5080 Ti will probably be close to $40.90. It might even be a little bit faster than $40.90. In terms of, no, I don't think it'll be 1600. I think 5080 Ti would be like 12, maybe 1500 at most for MSRP. I think it'll be $11.99 MSRP. Nvidia is a big fan of $11.99 MSRP. They really like that price point. 2080 Ti Founders Edition was that much. The 4080 was that much. The 3080 Ti was that much. So I can totally see a 5080 Ti being priced at like $11.99. $5080, yeah, but you can't use the overclock argument. That's a stupid argument, because someone could just overclock the 4090 then. See, like, you can't say, oh, you can overclock a 5080 to match 4090. Okay, yeah, you can do that. You can do that. It's not like you can't overclock a 4090. Now, granted, the 4090 probably doesn't have that much headroom, but you can still overclock it. It's still going to be faster. It's still going to have more VRAM at the end of the day. 1200 with 25% tariff will be, yeah. So I'm saying it's gonna be like $11.99, but you know all the AIBs are gonna make it more expensive. The AIBs will turn it into like a $1,600, $1,700 card, $1,800 card. Easily. So, yeah, I don't really care too much to hear more about 5090, 5080. This is kind of a joke launch. It's a paper launch. It's riddled with problems. There's hardware problems. There's firmware problems. Yeah, this is, yeah. You're not missing much on skipping this. Like, this is, yeah. It's actually smart to skip this generation, provided you have a 40 series card already. 4090. I almost feel bad for people that are on 30 series. You know why? Because the people that bought 30 series was not efficient. 30 series was high wattage. So now, like, if someone upgrades from a 3080 to like a 50 series card, it's still high wattage. In fact, the 5080 uses more electricity than 3080. So yeah, it's faster, but it's more power. So it's like, and 3080 was still a lot of power. 3080 was like 320 watts. 5080 is like 360 watts. The last time I looked at GPUs that were like high wattage, I remember when 250 was considered high wattage. That was the TDP of like a 1080 Ti. Then it became 300 watts. Now it's like 600 watts. It's stupid. So, but 360 watts is still a lot of power for a GPU. You know, so I feel bad for people on 30 series because it's like, oh, they want to upgrade to a 50 series, but it's like they're still gonna run their room really hot and uncomfortable because of the power consumption. Like, it's so weird. Like, it's like you're either on the even numbered Nvidias or you're on the odd numbered Nvidias, meaning you're someone who was on like 20 series and then you went to 40 series. So 20 series was relatively still like contained in terms of its power consumption. So you went from that to the really efficient 40 series. Meanwhile, the people who are on 30 series, that was high wattage, and like their upgrade path is also high wattage. So they're like stuck on the high energy consumption track. You know what I'm saying? There's two tracks. You're either on the efficient NVIDIA or you're on the non-efficient NVIDIA. You're like the high wattage NVIDIA. 30 series and 50 series is high wattage NVIDIA. And then 40 series and like the even numbered stuff is like the energy efficient NVIDIA. That's hilarious. If you could buy 4090 for MSRP. Oh yeah, most people definitely would do that. Like, that's better. It's better value than like all the 50 series cards at this point, if it's at MSRP. But it's impossible now. It's discontinued, and the only people selling them are people that are selling them used, and they're just trying to make a profit flipping them. And they've already used the card for like a year and a half or more. So yeah, some people, in some cases, 2 years or more than 2 years, because the card's more than 2 years now. You have a Asus Hero and an Aorus Xtreme. You'll keep one was wearing in comparison to you. You mean like evaluating the two of them? So they're both kind of they're very similar because they're the same price point. It depends on what you're using them for. AI Top is very good for like a mini HEDT, although that doesn't mean you can't use the Hero for the same purpose. So here's the thing, what I'll tell you on the Hero versus the AI Top. That's a really good question though. So if I was gonna build a AI computer, it's funny because the Gigabyte board is the Asus Hero is actually a better AI motherboard. The Gigabyte AI Top is actually a better like workstation motherboard. If that makes sense, I'll give you an example. The Gigabyte AI Top, the Aorus Xtreme AI Top has it has dual 10 gig LAN, but it lacks, or does it have it? Hold on, does it have an X8? Xtreme AI Top. Hold on. Does this... It's been a while since I looked at it. So it has one Gen 5 It has one Gen 5 X16, and it has... Oh, it has an X8. Wait, is that right? Hold on, this thing has dual X8? Whoa, oh man, never mind. I take back everything that I just said. The AI top is perfect for AI. It is perfect for AI. Because if you guys watched my latest video that I uploaded on the channel earlier this week, I did a video about AI. Like, for those of you that want to get into like AI model inferencing, maybe even model training, although I don't really know what you would build in terms of training a model on consumer grade hardware. It'll be very, very slow. However, like, just using AI, what I discovered is that, now I need to go back and test some of the other models, but what I can tell you is DeepSeek can be run locally on your desktop. So I highly recommend, if you did not watch my latest video on the topic of AI, on DeepSeek specifically, I go over how to run DeepSeek locally on your PC. So the thing about DeepSeek that I discovered, and this was a very interesting observation, if you have multiple graphics cards, so for example, if you have two 7900 XTX graphics cards, that means you have 24 gigabytes of VRAM times 2. You have 48 gigabytes of VRAM. And what I discovered is that if your motherboard supports the dual X8, and you really want dual X8, now technically you can install a second GPU in the X2 slot on the AI top. I don't recommend doing that, because the reason why I don't recommend doing that is because you have to remember the bottom PCIe slot, it's only 2 lanes, but also this runs through the chipset, whereas the first slot and the second slot run directly to the CPU socket. So if you're running dual GPUs, you want to install them on the top and the second. So you'll be running X8 and X8, because remember, the total lane count is 16 between those 2 slots. If you have one GPU, you put it in the top, it gets the full 16 lanes. But if you want a second GPU in the second slot, that takes 8 lanes from the top one. But the point is, if you're doing AI, you now have a 48, if you have dual 4090s, or dual 3090s, or dual 3090 Ti, or dual 7900 XTX, you get 48 gigabytes of VRAM, which is very nice for running the big, like 70 billion parameter AI models locally on the desktop. No cloud, none of that nonsense. It's straight up, it's running locally on the PC. So, yeah, this is great. The AI top is excellent. The Asus Hero is equivalent though. The difference is the AI top gives you a chipset X2 slot at the very bottom. You do not get this with the Crosshair Hero. You only get the dual X8 slots. But in terms of like dual GPU, both of them can handle dual GPU for AI. You can do 3 GPUs on Asus. I guess, but no, not really, because doesn't the third one run off the chipset? The reason why I don't like the idea of running a GPU off the third slot on any of these motherboards is because, and that assumes that the second slot is an X8 slot, is because you run all that data, like all that traffic to the VRAM is going through the chipset. So you're basically going to overload your chipset, because you guys have to remember, this is a 4-lane connection through the socket. So for example, if I connect a graphics card down here, that's on the bottom chipset. And if the other GPU is all the way up here connected to the CPU, The model will leverage the top GPU and the way down here. It's going to send all that data flowing through this chipset down to this chipset, then back up to this chipset. You see what I'm saying? You got all this traffic, this GPU to GPU interconnected traffic bottleneck through this X4 lane that's sharing bandwidth with all your SATA, your M.2 that runs off the chipsets and stuff. So that's why I don't like the idea of running GPUs off of the chipset PEG slot, because that's just not. It's also like a 2-lane slot. It isn't even like, that's like not even close to the same amount of bandwidth you're getting with an X8. So no, you definitely would run dual GPU off of an AI top motherboard. If somebody wants to run more than 2 graphics cards, you need to be on Threadripper. Threadripper can scale to as many GPUs as you need because of all the PCIe slots. You just have to have a motherboard, and you have to have a GPU that can fit like without blocking the other slots. Because see, the thing is, if I install a second GPU on my X8, typically that's going to be a dual slot GPU. So that means I'm not going to be able to use my third slot because it's going to be covered up by the second graphics card. See? So that's the other thing too. Yeah, AI top is really good though for that sort of use case. Yeah, it's a good motherboard. It also has that dual, like the nice thing about AI top, if you have the infrastructure to benefit from dual 10 gig, you actually get dual 10 gig LAN on the AI top. So that's a very, very nice feature that I think a lot of people won't really use or don't really need. But that's something to be aware of. You get dual 10 gig LAN. You can run dual graphics cards. You know, this is definitely like an... somebody in my Discord said that it's basically... The platform is kind of like a mini HEDT. Very similar to Intel's Arrow Lake platform. I would say like Z890 and X870E both are like mini... Let's say mini HEDT. They're miniature high-end desktop / workstation type boards, especially when they have stuff like dual 10 gig, because the Threadripper board doesn't even have dual 10 gig. Threadripper only has one 10 gig, and I think it has like a 5 gig or a 2.5 as the other one, depending on the motherboard. But yeah, this thing has dual 10 gig. That is kind of overkill for a motherboard, but you know, it's definitely a talking point for this motherboard. Did you try running 5 M.2 using the Slim SAS to keep the second? That's what I'm doing right now. Which one are you talking about? Are you talking which motherboard? The Hero? I already did a video on that. You need to check out my video on how to avoid PCI lane sharing on the X870E Crosshair Hero. I cover all of that in the video. And spoiler alert, it requires using the Slim SAS. Yeah, I am running dual GPUs. Yes. Yeah, you're talking about, hold on. X870E Crosshair Hero. See, the Hero and the AI top are very, very similar in that they both provide dual X8 slots. Now, the difference is the AI top from Gigabyte has no lane sharing for storage drives off of the primary X16, whereas the Asus motherboard does have lane sharing. But you can avoid the lane sharing if you don't use 2 of the M.2 slots. So basically, what I have in the Hero, maybe I do need to do another video on the Hero as kind of like a follow-up, because there's one thing I don't like about the Hero, and I'll say it here on the video. The Hero's chipsets run very hot. Like, the Hero idles the chipset temperatures around like 60 degrees Celsius. That is significantly hotter than the Gigabyte. The Gigabyte Aorus idles the chipset temperatures at like 50 degrees at most. So the Gigabyte is really, really good. If you're someone who wants really good Gen 5 cooling and you want cool temperature on your chipset heat sinks, get the Gigabyte. You will not be disappointed. This thing has proper heat sinks for the Gen 5. The Gen 5 heatsink on the AI top is way better than the one on the ROG Hero. The ROG Hero is terrible for an actual Gen 5 SSD. The idle temperature on my Gen 5 SSD, and we're talking about this SSD, the Crucial T700. This thing idles at like 60 degrees, 60 something degrees on the Asus Hero. Gigabyte, it's like 40 something, guys. It's like so much lower on the Gigabyte. It's not even a competition at that point. Like, Gigabyte just destroys the Hero. The Extreme's cooling is just so much more extreme, pun intended, compared to the Hero. And then on top of that, the heatsink for the chipset cooling on the Gigabyte runs so much cooler. The Gigabyte, the chipsets, those dual chipsets, those X870E chipsets, they run at like 50 degrees on the Aorus. On the Asus Hero, they run at like 60 plus. It's crazy. It's like at least 10 degrees hotter on the Asus. Also, the Asus does not have the beep. There's nowhere on this motherboard to plug in your little, I used to have it on the desk here, I don't know where I put it, but the little speaker for your case, you can hear your beeps, so you can get your postcode info. Some people don't care about that, but I like that because if, like, for example, if I wanted to do a speed test, like, who's the fastest at posting the BIOS, I cannot measure it on the Asus properly because Asus doesn't have the speaker header on the motherboards anymore. Whereas with Gigabyte, they still have it. Same with MSI and ASRock. So yeah, you basically have everything. All the debug tools, all the good stuff, really good cooling on the Aorus. So like if someone wants to go Aorus, get Aorus. It's good. Even if you don't need a dual 10 gig. Thermal pads behind the RAM slots? What do you mean the RAM slots? You're talking about, like, this? There's no thermal pads on the RAM. Like, what? The AI top is too expensive. The AI top, isn't it on sale at Newegg for the same price of the Hero? You know what motherboard's too expensive? The Godlike. The motherboard Armor. You're talking about which one? The Asus? AI top is good. This one's really good. Yeah, the Hero is still a good board though. Like it's just. So here's what I've realized. So the Hero is really good if you're someone who wants to like overclock. If you want to do a lot of overclocking, like RAM overclocking and CPU overclocking, I would say the Hero is probably the best motherboard for overclocking. Let's put it this way, guys. There's a reason why when you look at the XOC, you know, the extreme overclocking world records and the community and there's a reason why everyone's like posting their records with the Asus Hero motherboards, because this thing has the best like ease of use toolkit in the BIOS settings and just what they put into the BIOS for overclocking. The stuff like NitroPath, for example, for RAM overclocking, for 2 sticks of overclocking RAM, that kind of stuff. So that's the reason why. Now, 4 sticks is completely different. 4 sticks, the Hero was actually trash. If you want 4 sticks of memory, do not go with Hero. Get the Aorus or the Ace or the ASRock Tai Chi. Those are a whole lot better for 4 sticks of memory. But if you just want 2 sticks of memory and you want to go like really, really fast on the RAM, the Hero is probably the best one. Outside of getting a motherboard like a mini ITX that only has 2 sticks of memory. Like 2 actual DIMM slots, you know. So, but Nitro Path is almost equivalent to having only a 2 DIMM motherboard. So that's the reason why the Hero is the one that you always see people posting their overclocking world records, and they're using, and you look at what they're actually using, they're using the Hero. And that's the reason why. So if you want to do overclocking, the Hero is probably one of the best choices out there. I would recommend it for overclocking. But if you're someone who just wants to build like a mini HEDT workstation, you want like high-speed networking, a lot of storage, all that kind of stuff, AI top is going to be better, especially because it has the dual 10 gig. The Hero doesn't even have 10 gig LAN. I don't understand how Asus can sell this motherboard and charge $700 and not include a 10 gig NIC. Like, it doesn't make any sense why this motherboard or how this motherboard doesn't have a 10 gig LAN on the back. They dared to put dual LAN, but it's like, okay, 5 plus 2.5. Yeah, okay. Like, that's really useful. Thanks, Asus. Yeah, 5 gig plus 2.5. Okay. Yeah. Might as well have just done dual 5 gig at that point. Overclocking on AMD seems like I don't understand what you mean by that. Do you know how to overclock on the Z890? Do you have any idea how complicated overclocking on the new Intel Arrow Lake is? Dude, overclocking on AMD is so much easier than Arrow Lake. I don't think people know what they're talking about. Like, have you looked at how you overclock on an Intel Z890 motherboard? I'm going to be doing a video on overclocking the new Intel soon, but the reason why it hasn't come out is because it's so complicated. That's hilarious. You actually think that overclocking Intel is, like, worth it? Or, like, easy? What? So would a regular 8-layer PCB X870E, like the MPG Edge, yeah, 4 sticks of RAM, as long as you're running your RAM at like 5200, 5600, it's not a problem. 4 sticks. It's if you want to do like 6000 and you're doing like dual rank, then it becomes challenging. But you can do 96 gigabytes. You can do 96 gigabytes across 4 sticks. You can do 4 times 24. I have like multiple videos on how to do that, guys. You're thinking of, like, again, you're thinking of old platforms. Z690, dude, Z690 is 2021. We're really talking about a 2021 platform. Z790 is 2022. So we're talking about 2021, overclocking a 2021/2022 platform? Really? Like, what? That stuff's old. 13900K is like so 2022. That is some old hardware right there. Now, it's not ancient. I didn't say it's ancient. It's old. Can you explain monitor bottlenecking? What? Monitor bottlenecking? Like, what is it? Oh, well, wait, monitor bottlenecking? $900K is ancient. That's not old, that's ancient. That's 2018. So, remember, computer hardware is not like humans. See, okay, now I guess we can bring up Paint. Congratulations, you activated Paint mode. Humans and computers are very different in terms of, like, how they age. You know what I'm saying? So, computers operate on 3-year, 5-year, 7-year. 7-year. So anything less than 3 years is considered like normal, mainstream, good. Once a platform becomes 3 years old, it's not like good anymore. It's fine if you still use a CPU that's more than 3 years old. It's just not top tier. This is the reason why. If you guys watched, well, I'll use Digital Foundry as an example here, because Digital Foundry made a video recently. Like, I don't remember if it was on their weekly podcast show that they do early in the week, but I remember John from Digital Foundry. So we'll use John from Digital Foundry as an example. Not to pick on John or anything. I love Digital Foundry, by the way, but John uses a 12900K. A 12900K. And he literally even said in the video that his 12900K is mid-range. That's what he said. This is not my words. These are not my words. You can go watch the video. I'm using Digital Foundry's own words, talking about, like, John's own words, talking about his own CPU that he uses for testing. 12900K, he said, is mid-range. And he is absolutely correct. He is correct, 100% accurate with his statement. 12900K is a mid-range CPU. This is not a high-end CPU anymore. Just because somebody has an i9 doesn't mean their CPU is high-end or flagship tier anymore. Because computers age. It's no different from, like, if you look at sports, you look at the NBA, you look at, like, I don't know, like, if anyone watches the NBA, if you guys remember, like Dirk Nowitzki, the Dallas Mavericks used to be really, really good. Like, you know, the classic era. And what's that one guy that was for the Nets? Jason Kidd. Was it Jason Kidd? These guys used to be top-tier basketball players. But, you know, as they age, as with anything with time, you know, they age out. They're not like the flagship top-tier NBA star anymore. You know, same deal with computer hardware. 12900K, this thing ain't no spring chicken anymore. This thing is not a high-end CPU anymore. It is a mid-range part. So this is how it is with hardware. So what I like to do is I look at things from a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year life cycle. It's because this is the reason why I use this. People are probably like, well, where do you get the 3, 5, and 7? The reason why we use 3-year, 5-year, 7-year is because typical computer, like, warranty generations operate no more than 3 years. Especially if we're talking about consumer grade hardware. So when you buy a motherboard or a graphics card or a CPU, typically, depending on the brand, depending on the AIB, you get a minimum of 1 year, maximum of 3 years. And nothing more. However, where does this 5-year and 7-year come from? 5-year and 7-year is for enterprise business customers. So, like, if someone buys a server, like, think of it like if they bought an Intel Xeon server or an AMD EPYC server. The servers will carry, at minimum, they will carry 3-year, but they can carry up to a 7-year warranty. See, so it's different from consumers. Consumers have a 1, 2, or 3-year maximum warranty in the consumer space. So, for example, if anyone bought an RTX 4090 in 2022 at launch, this is their last year for the 4090, because the 4090 will be 3 years old in, I think, October of this year, which means, I'm just using an example of someone who bought a 4090 at launch in 2022, in October of 2022. That's when that GPU launched. That's how old it is. So it is going to be 3 years old this October, which means the 4090 will no longer be considered like mainstream best. You know, like it's older than 3 years. It passes that 3-year mark, which means now it's kind of like, yeah, it's not like super great anymore. You know, there'll be better options, especially once stuff like the 5080 Ti comes out and that kind of stuff. And then AMD's new stuff next year. So that gives you an idea when you're thinking about these things, about like computer hardware, when should I upgrade, what's a good time frame of upgrading. So typically if you hold on to your computer for 3 years, regardless of what it is, like let's say you have a CPU for 3 years, you know, like once you hit that 3-year mark, your CPU has been dethroned. It's like knocked down a whole tier in terms of how good it is. So going back to the example of the 12900K, the 12900K, the reason why John from Digital Foundry is referring to his own 12900K as a mid-range CPU is because this thing is from 2021. 2021. November 2021 was the, or was it October? No, I think it was November. It was like November 4th or something. This is when that CPU came out. So that's clearly more than 3 years old now, which means it is now mid-range. It's not that good anymore. And later this year, guess what? You know what's going to be considered mid-range later this year? 7950X, 13900K. These guys will become mid-range later this year. Both of them. Basically, all of Zen 4 and all of Intel's Raptor Lake will become mid-range this year. So these CPUs are really not that good anymore. They're okay, they're not terrible, but they're not like the best CPUs anymore. You see what I'm saying? So most people, and I've seen, like someone was saying in the chat, like most people skip a generation. Yes, you should skip a generation. You should not be upgrading every generation. And that's the reason why there's a 3-year period where your hardware is fine. Because you guys understand that every 2 years, there's a new generation. This is another statement that is fairly true. Hardware generations last, on average, about 2 years or 24 months. But that doesn't mean after 2 years the hardware is old. And that's the reason why we're saying 3. Because that means the year after the part becomes 2 years old, it gets replaced with the next generation. The next, like, full new architecture. However, it's still decent. It's still good. Because it's still not 3 years old yet. You see what I'm saying? So that's why, at minimum, most people should consider an upgrade. At minimum, at the 3-year mark. Which means if you upgrade every generation, that means you're not holding on to your hardware at least 3 years. Which means you're also not getting the full warranty value out of your hardware if you're like constantly upgrading. Now, a true enthusiast doesn't care because they like upgrading because they are just, I don't know, like some of them are OCD. They just want to have the new shiny part. You know, like they got to have the latest CPU. They got to have the latest GPU. They got to have the latest, you know, whatever. Gen 5 SSD. They got to have the latest new chipset motherboard revision, even though it isn't even that different from the previous one. I'm looking at you, Intel Z790 versus Intel Z690, or more recently, AMD X870E versus AMD X670E. So true enthusiasts don't care about the whole 3, 5, 7. But the reality is most people actually do follow the 3, 5, 7 year upgrade cycle. Think about people that you know that are not that enthusiastic about their PC hardware. How often do your friends or people that you know that play games on PC, how often do they upgrade their hardware? It's probably going to be one of these three numbers, just not anything sooner, meaning not 2 years or less. Three to 4 years basically means 3 years. The 3-year mark encompasses the 4-year. $4090 will hit the 3-year mark in October of this year. You just upgraded from the 8700K. So think about that. So the 8700K, the i7 8700K is a 6-core, 12-thread CPU from 2017. Fall 2017. See, I know my CPUs. I know my CPUs and GPUs. Someone can list the CPU and the GPU. As long as it's not like something from the 90s or something like that old, I can tell you when it came out. So this one, and I can tell you the core count too. So the 8700K is a 6-core, 12-thread from 2017. So how old is that? You guys know, you guys can see that CPU falls into the maximum duration. You fall into the maximum duration. Because if you upgraded, so meaning you're in the 7-year bracket, it's going to become 8 years old later in the second half of this year. The 8700K will turn 8 years old. So you fall into the 7-year. You fall into the maximum duration in terms of like how old you should allow the hardware to get. If you go beyond 7 years, so here's the thing: like if you let your CPU age beyond 7 years, at that point your hardware is so old that anything you choose to upgrade to that's current will be a massive upgrade versus whatever you're upgrading from. Okay, so that covers that. I don't even know how we got into this discussion, but this was actually a really good discussion. It's an interesting discussion. I wasn't expecting to talk about this on stream. FX8350. FX8350 is extremely old. Now there's a CPU you don't see every day. The FX8350 was... Okay, this is the controversial one. This was advertised as 8-core, 8-thread, but after the whole lawsuit about AMD misadvertising, misrepresenting the product, it was, some people consider it a 4-core, a quad-core, which somewhat was mimicking a certain way of simultaneous multi-threading. I always thought of it as a quad-core, like a 4-core, 8-thread CPU, but physically it's kind of like a hybrid between an 8-core, depending on how you look at it. But technically, in terms of the physical aspects of it, it was an 8-core. This CPU was from October of 2012. 2012. Now that is a CPU that is... it's basically a dinosaur. I don't think it's a dinosaur yet because it's not extinct. But this is an ancient CPU. This thing is ancient stuff because it's so old now. Well over a decade. So if someone's on the 8350, so the 8350, this is the CPU of Steve from Gamers Nexus. Steve from Gamers Nexus. I don't know if he upgraded recently, but last I heard, Steve from Gamers Nexus uses the FX 8350 as his personal computer at home. Like, I don't know if he still uses it, but last year, at the very least, 2024, 2023, he was still using it. So, yeah, that's an ancient CPU. Yeah. So that is the CPU that Steve from Gamers Nexus uses. X58. X58, that was a CPU platform that I always wanted and I could never get because I couldn't afford it back in the day. X58, that is Gulf Town. That is the i7 980X. Triple channel DDR3. This was 2000. Well, the one I'm talking about was 2010. But yeah, the original socket, LGA 1366. I think this one rolled out at the very end of 2008. 2008. The original i7, the very first i7 was the i7 920. I think it was the i7 920. One of those. But anyway, LGA, man, LGA 1366. I always wanted an LGA 1366 back in the day. LGA 1366 was so cool because this thing was HEDT, high-end desktop. Man, I wanted one of those back in the day. But then Sandy Bridge came out and made it basically irrelevant for everyone. Unless you needed like some sort of workstation type task that could benefit from triple memory or whatever. Yeah, this was a... wasn't this a 6-core? No, was that a quad core? I don't remember the core count on this thing. Is this a 6-core? I think it's a 6-core, wasn't it? 6-core, 12-thread? Is that right? Someone may have to fact check me on that. But I think this was a 6-core. Maybe it was a quad-core. I know it was triple channel DDR3. I can't remember like what it was. It was 6-core? I got it. Now you guys are stretching my memory way back because now we're starting to talk about CPUs that I never actually owned. So it's harder for me to remember the CPUs that I never ever actually laid hands on. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, the old one from 2008 was a quad core. The 920, the i7 920, the 930, those are quad cores. I'm talking about the big Gulf Town. The big Gulf Town. That one was a 6-core. So this was the CPU that people who were doing live streaming on Twitch before it was even called Twitch. Back in this time, so now we're going way back. In this era, the era of 2010, this was when Twitch TV used to be called Justin TV. How many people watching this stream actually remember when Twitch used to be called Justin TV? Justin.tv was the original name. That's how far back. We're talking about ancient CPUs now. When we're talking about Gulf Town and like Nehalem architecture, this stuff is so old. Twitch TV didn't even exist. And YouTube didn't even have a YouTube partner program. Or it was like so like razor, it wasn't even profitable back then. Probably. The Godlike is just stupid expensive. Pentium 4 is way, way back. Pentium 4, man, isn't... No, like... Okay, we're talking about 2010. We're talking about 2010. Someone's mentioning Pentium 4. Pentium 4 was in an era where, like, anyone who knew anything about computers were not using Pentium 4. Pentium 4 was the most garbage you could possibly use. MySpace was, like, so 2007. Now we're going back to, like, WoW Vanilla. Now we're going further back. We're going further back. Someone's talking about Pentium 4, man. Pentium 4 was complete and utter garbage. Back then, you wanted AMD 64, Athlon 3000 or 3200, whatever plus. You wanted these type of CPUs. This was the CPU for World of Warcraft. AMD 64, the world's first native 64-bit CPU that could do... that could run Windows XP 64-bit edition, but nobody actually used Windows XP 64-bit. Everyone bought an AMD 64 to run Windows XP 32-bit edition on it, with like 512 megs to 1 gig of RAM, and some people with 2 gigs of RAM. No, Sempron was the low end. Sempron was the low end. There was AMD Athlon and AMD Sempron. And then AMD Phenom became the new flagship. AMD and Intel went back and forth up until Sandy Bridge. Up until 2011. Then AMD kind of like fell off and had to go into the wilderness and rediscover, you know, who they are and all this stuff, and the era of Rory Reid and then Lisa Su joining the company. Like, that's a whole nother stream. Like, we're talking now, we're going way back into like too much of history between these companies. But all you guys need to know is that AMD was the top dog in the CPU world in the early 2000s, up until Intel released the Conroe, which was the Core 2 Duo. Then Intel took back the crown from AMD when they got the Conroe, which was Core 2 Duo. However, AMD was still competitive with Intel throughout the second half of the O's decade, because AMD came out with Phenom. There was some hardware bug with the first Phenom, but then they released Athlon 2 and Phenom 2 and Phenom X4 and Phenom X6. So AMD was competitive with Intel. Intel had Nehalem, and then of course Intel had HEDT, the Gulftown stuff at the end of that decade. But it was really Sandy Bridge and AMD's big bet on clustered multi-threading, CMT, which is basically Bulldozer and the FX series. AMD bet on the wrong type of technology, and then Intel ran away with it and did their victory lap with Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge, and then AMD was kind of like, okay, time for me to go into exile. Into exile I must go. Failed I have. You know, like, Intel has the high ground. We're not going to do an Anakin jump because we know we're not that dumb. So AMD basically, like, went and hid on Dagobah with Yoda and trained with Lisa Su and all this stuff and the Jedi, or the remnants of the Jedi. And then they finally came back arisen from the grave with Ryzen. And we all kind of know that story. Yeah, the 2010s was a really weird time. 2010, that's the time when I make I draw the timeline a lot with the timeline. You guys know, because it's like, we know. We probably need to clean some of this up. There's just too much stuff on the board now that's just going to confuse people that join the stream late. I don't know why we're still talking about CPUs, but, you know, the 5090 and the 5080 are so boring and stupid at this point. Here, we'll go to like 2022, I guess. So, Golf Town, Phenom 2 X6. These things were like here. Then in 2011, Sandy Bridge. Man, I'm gonna have to make this like way smaller. The font's too big. Sandy Bridge. We got Bulldozer. FX8150. A lot of people mistakenly call 8350 the Bulldozer. That's not Bulldozer, that's Pile Driver. FX8150 was Bulldozer. So you had Bulldozer and Sandy Bridge in 2021. Then you had Ivy Bridge and Pile Driver. Pile Driver is the 8350. Not Bulldozer. A lot of people mix that up. So this was 2012. So you had that in 2012. Then in 2013, there was Haswell. Then in 2014, there was nothing. There was Devil's Can, which is basically Haswell refresh. Then in 2015, you had, it's kind of weird. I guess like in 2014, technically Intel launched like Broadwell, sort of. And then 2015 was Skylake. So that's your i7 6700K. That was 2015. 2016, basically no one did anything. Intel didn't launch anything. AMD didn't launch anything. Literally nobody did anything. Like what happened? This year was like thrown into a black hole or something. Like it didn't even exist. 2016, there was like nothing. Seriously, there was like nothing. 2017, Cabby Lake. Intel's most trash. The last quad core i7. The last quad core i7. 2017. Then Ryzen 1000 series. The first Ryzen. The first Ryzen. Zen 1. 2017, the year of the Zen, of the AMD Zen moment. They came back like Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi. But then, you know what that did? That prompted Intel to do what Intel does when they gotta do something quick. It's like, we gotta do something, guys. We gotta do something. There's something there that was not there before, and it looks like a ghost. I don't know what to do, because we can't fight a ghost. What do we do? What do we do? Cabby Lake's dying. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? 8700K. Help us out. Coffee Lake arrives. Coffee Lake. Intel double launches. Intel goes full on panic mode. Panic, panic, panic. The public knows the cat's out of the bag. We did a quad core. We did a quad core. We did a quad core. Quad core. Quad core. Quad core. Uh-oh, they figured it out. They figured it out. We copy paste. We copy paste. They got tired of the copy paste. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Six generations of quad core i7s. 6 generations of quad core i7s. Sandy, Ivy, Haswell, Broadwell, Skylake, Cabby Lake. Literally, and in literally one of them, there was nothing there. Intel got so lazy that in 2016, instead of launching another copy-paste, they forgot to launch a copy-paste. They did nothing. Literally, like nothing. The whole year. Can you imagine? Can you guys, as enthusiasts, imagine going an entire year with no new CPU launch? 2016. But what do? Full out panic mode. Ryzen's here. Panic, panic, double launch, double launch. Launch something, launch it quick, put 2 more cores, put it, get it out. 8700K, 8700K. Because everyone was like review bashing Cabby Lake. If you guys remember, This thing, i7 7700K. Coffee Lake, i7 8700K. This was trash. It was a copy paste of so many things. This was new. It was a 6-core. So Intel went full panic mode and double launched. So, trying to think, like, what else? Oh, yeah, well, we're not talking about HEDT. HEDT was like... HEDT has a different timeline. It's basically offset by 1. So basically you would add 1 year to all of these. So for example, X99. X99 was Haswell E. That was 2014. That was the very first consumer DDR4 platform. Because up until here, all of this stuff was DDR3. This is all DDR3. DDR4 started with Haswell E on HEDT X99. That was the 5960X and the 5930K. The 6-core and the 8-core quad channel. So think of those as like Intel's Threadripper, so to speak. So that's what that was. But we're not talking about the Threadripper stuff. That was like on a different timeline. So just to keep things simple, you had these guys. Whoops. You had Cabby, Ryzen, and Coffee Lake all in the same year. Then in 2018, we got Zen Plus. Ryzen 7 2700X. The Zen Plus. And then what do we get from Intel? Coffee Plus. The very first, world's first i9. The world's first i9, aka the 9900K, launched at the end of well, not the end, it was like fall 2018. The world's first Coffee Lake Plus with the 9000 series. i7 9700K, i9 9900K. And that was the generation where Intel's like, hey guys, we're so generous. We're giving the consumers an 8-core CPU on desktop. And you don't have to pay for a $500 HEDT motherboard with quad channel memory that you'll never benefit from. So that's what they did. However, in 2019, things got crazy. AMD launched Zen 2 with the Ryzen, not the very first Ryzen 9 3950X. This was 2019. So Zen 2. And what did Intel launch? I don't even know what Intel did that year. Did Intel even do anything? No, did Intel launch the... No, the i9 was 2018, wasn't it? Or do I have that backwards? Did Intel not do anything? I guess Intel didn't do anything that year. Yeah, so Intel didn't do anything, I guess. They were more like reactionary. I think Comet Lake was coming soon. I don't even remember what Intel did in 2019. Anyway, AMD launched Zen 2 in 2019. And then in 2020, Comet Lake. Intel's 10th gen. And Zen 3, aka Ryzen 5000 series. Launched in 2020. Everything launched in 2020. 2020 was PS5, Xbox Series X. You know, like all the consoles, RDNA 2, RTX 30 series, like everything that you can think of in the computer space launched in 2020, which just so happened to be the pandemic year. So you had Comet Lake 10th gen, which I'm pretty sure was 2020, not 2019. And then you had like Zen 3 at the end of that year, like toward the end. And then during this time, so I guess they did some kind of revision for mobile. So it was like Coffee Lake plus. So yeah, 14 nanometer. 14 nanometer. This one, Broadwell was the first 14 nanometer. 14 nanometer. Skylake was 14 nanometer plus. Actually, no. It was 14 nanometer with the new... Is that right? Yes. 14 nanometer with the new architecture. Then Kaby Lake was 14 nanometer plus. Then Coffee Lake was 14 nanometer plus plus. Then Coffee Plus, aka 9900K, was 14 nanometer plus plus plus. Then we had Comet Lake. This one was 14 nanometer plus 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 plus. So this one was the 14 nanometer plus 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 plus. Then in 2021, we had one of my favorite Intel CPUs that everybody seemed to hate on, Rocket Lake, the 11th gen Intel. This one was my favorite one because this one was 14 nanometer plus 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 plus. So yeah, this one was 2021. 14 nanometer plus 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 5 pluses. 5 pluses. But this was Intel's attempt to defeat the Zen 3. And it basically failed to do it because not only did it lose to Zen 3, it used more electricity than Zen 3, and it lost to Intel's 10th gen in a lot of areas, in particular multi-thread workloads. So the pluses were becoming too top-heavy. So what do? Activate panic mode. Activate panic mode. Press the panic button. Do something. Do something. Do something. Panic. Panic. Do something. So then what do? Double launch. Double launch. We need help. We need help. Inbound. Help. Calling reinforcements. Calling reinforcements. Alder Lake. Alder Lake. And this one was Intel 7. Also known as 7 nanometer. So they double launch. Intel double launched in 2021. Panic. Panic attack. Panic attack. There's too much pluses. We can't do it. We thought Rocket Lake would be a big hit. It's DDR4. It has AVX 512. But it failed. Not only did it fail to win against Zen 3, aka Ryzen 5000, in a lot of cases it lost to Intel's 10th gen. So it's worth mentioning, guys, that at this time in history, up until up until Q4, so from like 2020 to Q4 2021, AMD was equal to Intel. And then in the middle section of this, AMD was dominating Intel in CPU. Ryzen 5000, Zen 3 was so successful. This was probably the most successful AMD CPU since like 2005. So it literally took them like 15 years to decisively come back and hands down win against Intel in every single metric objectively imaginable or measurable. So we're talking AMD won in IPC, AMD won in single thread, AMD won in multi-thread, AMD won in energy efficiency. Basically every single metric imaginable, AMD was utterly dominating Intel. And it was during this time that the business customers, so the server guys, started catching wind of this. And this was the time. It was during the dark times, during the pandemic. Ironically enough, it was during the pandemic that AMD started to really take off in the data center world. And this became a big problem for Intel in that time. Now, because of the supply shortage issues, there was super long lead times. So, yeah, that is the reason why, like, I always think of 2020. Like, if someone asked me what was the greatest time in AMD's corporate history, I would tell them the pandemic. Like, and I'm being 100% serious. 2020 was the year of AMD. This was the year that AMD brought us things like Zen 3, which utterly destroyed Intel's entire product stack. They had Threadripper as well. Intel was completely like floundering and missing in action. Skylake X was there, but it was so old and outdated at that point because Skylake X was like 2017 or something, like way back. It was like 3 years old at that point. So man, and Threadripper just kept on coming out with new. There was Threadripper Zen 1, Zen Plus Threadripper, Zen 2 Threadripper. Now Zen 3 Threadripper was only Threadripper Pro, so consumers didn't have access to that. But, you know, Threadripper came back with Zen 4 later on. The point that I'm making is it was during this time, AMD, like, basically hit win after win. They launched PS5 with Sony. The Xbox Series X came out in 2020. The RDNA 2 graphics cards. Arguably AMD's best graphics card of all time. The 6900 XT. This thing was, no one expected, let's put it this way. In 2020, no one expected AMD to have a GPU that could match the 3080. Let alone the 2080 Ti. But not only did they launch this that could equal the 3080, and in rasterization it could beat the 3080, they went above and beyond. They went and launched something that could compete with NVIDIA's best. Like, when was the last time AMD actually did that? So think of it like this. Let's put things into another perspective. If NVIDIA kept the 3090 for the professional market, like if they never launched the 3090 for consumers, and the highest NVIDIA went was the 3080 for $700, if you could even buy one at MSRP during the pandemic, AMD would have actually been faster than NVIDIA that generation in the consumer space if NVIDIA did not launch what should have been a Titan product as the 3090 for $1,500. So keep that in mind. That was the year that AMD, not only did they surpass Intel, they actually matched NVIDIA. And when was the last time you've ever seen AMD do that? AMD has always been like the perpetual underdog in this silicon war. Yet somehow in 2020, they managed to defy all odds and beat Intel hands down and actually match NVIDIA. That's insane. That's like unheard of. So this is the reason why 2020 is that magical year where the stars aligned for AMD. This little underdog, this scrappy little underdog managed to come back and hit a home run multiple times with multiple different product lines. So crazy year for AMD. And that's why in 2021, Intel they launched Rocket Lake to counter Zen 3, and it still lost to Zen 3. It was so bad that they panicked and launched Alder Lake in the exact same year. So there's a trend. When Intel panics, they double launch in the exact same year. Look at that. Notice the pattern. Notice the behavior. When they panic, they double launch. So 2021, Intel launched 2 different CPUs. And in 2021, AMD didn't even launch any new CPUs. See, here's the thing, guys. Zen 3 was so far ahead of Intel. Like, a lot of people don't seem to recognize this fact that Zen 3 was so far ahead of Rocket Lake that Intel literally had to pull forward their whole roadmap and quickly launch Alder Lake as soon as it was ready to go, because they had to put it out there to retake the crown. Now, when Alder Lake came out, it was able to beat Zen 3. Alder Lake was faster than AMD's Zen 3, basically the 5000 CPUs. But then you know what happened in 2022? Enter 5800X3D enters this chat. 5800X3D enters the arena in the spring of 2022 and retakes the gaming crown. So things in the CPU world have been very interesting since like 2019. And I remember that there's a video from Linus in the summer of 2019 when he came out of the Computex press conference that AMD did, where Lisa Su went on stage and announced the Ryzen 3000 series Zen 2. And I still remember this video. I don't know why it's so vivid in my memory, of Linus walking down the streets of Taipei talking about how this new CPU that AMD is launching is so revolutionary that it's literally going to change the landscape of the PC DIY space as we know it.
My 5090 and 9800X3D only gave me 84 FPS in the Monster Hunter Wilds benchmark with 4K full ray tracing, DLSS and frame gen off.
Yeah, we're going to be looking into that game. I'll be doing lots of live streams this weekend, including tomorrow on Monster Hunter Wilds. We'll be testing multiple different CPUs and GPUs. We're going to be testing ones that were also not featured last time, just to get a full picture of what to expect with that game. But yeah, that game, I appreciate the super chat, because that game, we were going to talk about it at the very end of this stream, or I guess the last topic of this stream is going to be Monster Hunter Wilds, because the open beta is available. I think it's actually available now. The benchmark is up. So if you guys, and the benchmark is free to download. So if you want to run the benchmark and see how it performs, you can see how it stacks up to a 5090 and a 9800X3D. But yeah, 4K full ray tracing, that's actually a pretty good result, to be honest. Like 84 FPS at 4K with full ray tracing turned on and no frame gen. That is actually a very good result, because I have tested, here, let me see. I tested my 4090 yesterday, and I hold on, let me find, I gotta find the, okay, so my results, just to compare with your result of 84, although you're using ray tracing. So I did 90 at 4K, 90 frames per second with no ray tracing. So no ray tracing, just the ultra preset, no frame gen. I did 90 frames per second with a 4090. So you're doing 84 with full RT at the same resolution, and you're doing only like 6 FPS lower. So if I turn ray tracing on, mine's probably gonna drop to like 70 something, if I had to guess. So that's still a pretty good result. With no frame gen, that is actually a very good result, because without frame gen, most people that play this game are going to be lucky if they can average above 60 to 70 FPS with super high-end hardware without frame gen. So we will talk about Monster Hunter Wilds later in the stream, because that is the next big game. And for those of you that don't know, like the game is free to play this weekend and next weekend. So if you're someone who has never played Monster Hunter before and you want to know what it's all about, you can easily just download the open beta test. It's open and available to everyone who has access to Steam on PC. And it's also openly available on the PlayStation 5. So I also plan on looking at the PlayStation 5 Pro to see how it handles the game. We have not discussed the price hikes. But, yeah, so I guess we're done with the CPU discussion. We were supposed to talk about laptop CPUs, but we ended up talking about all these old desktop CPUs for some reason. Let's talk about the laptops real quick. So, let me go back here. So there's new CPUs coming to mobile this year. So Strix Point launched last year. So we are going to see Strix Point Professional for business class laptops. So think of like ThinkPads, for example. They're going to get Strix Point. They're available now for a couple of them. And then the Strix Halo is going to be available soon with HP with the ZBook Ultra. So that's a really nice 14-inch mobile workstation. I like how they're calling it mobile workstation PC, because Strix Halo is so powerful that it is basically a desktop. It is very similar to a desktop in terms of its compute power. It is a unified memory architecture. So think of it kind of like a hybrid between a gaming console and an actual desktop PC. It is very good. Like, Strix Halo is so good that you can literally run a 70 billion parameter like large language model. You can basically run, let's put it this way, you can run DeepSeek, the full 70 billion parameter DeepSeek can run locally on Strix Halo. Like, as long as you have, I think the minimum is 64 gigabytes of RAM to run the full thing. Otherwise, Strix Halo scales to up to 128 gigabytes of unified memory. So that is insane. So that's how it's able to do that, because it has access to that huge memory pool. And this is the reason why VRAM on graphics cards is becoming the new like gold standard metric that determines like how valuable your GPU will be when you try to sell it on the used market. Because a lot of these AI people are looking for high VRAM GPUs. And the reason why the 7900 XTX literally went out of stock as soon as the DeepSeek model was released to the public, because people started immediately testing it on local hardware. That's why I did that video, because I wanted to show you guys, like, hey, you can literally run DeepSeek with a 7900 XTX and get the full performance. The full reasoning model runs on a 700 XTX, and that is like the cheapest way to go, because the XTX was like a $1,000 24 gigabyte graphics card, and you could get one as low as like $800 something. And literally, since that video's come out, you can't buy an XTX anymore. They're completely gone. Like, you go to Newegg, they're all sold out. Like, every single XTX is sold out. If you see one listed, it's from a third-party seller, and they're selling it for like scalper prices. So the high VRAM GPUs, like the 5090, the 4090, the 3090 Ti, the 3090, the 7900 XTX, and maybe even the 7900 XT, because the 700 XT has 20 gigabytes of VRAM. That's still a very good amount. Those are going to just be gobbled up instantly overnight because of AI. So all we need now is for the crypto guys to come back. Someone needs to invent a crypto coin that's old school proof of work and very profitable, and just convince people to mine it, and they can like turn it into Bitcoin or whatever. They can exchange it. And basically then all the 4060s, all the 3060s, the 7700 XT, the 7800 XT, all those GPUs will vanish instantly if that happens. So then no one can buy a GPU for the entire duration of this year. if that happens. Because you got AI people sniping 5090s. You have all the crypto people buying everything from the 9070 XT all the way down to like the bare minimum Intel 12 gigabyte or whatever. So it's like, yeah, it's going to be pretty crazy. How much disk space do I need for the full model? I think you only really need like, it's not that much actually. I have to go back and look through my video. It's not that much. The storage space is not the problem. The problem is the VRAM. And because you have a 5090, you can easily run the full model. I'm pretty sure you can. 32 gigabytes of VRAM, yeah. Maybe I don't know about the 70 billion. You can definitely do the 40 billion. I don't know about 70. 70 might be too much for 32 gigabytes of VRAM. But see, this is the reason why Strix Halo is so crazy, because Strix Halo has up to 128 gigabytes of unified memory. So when I say unified memory, you can think of that as 128 gigabytes of system RAM, which also serves dual purpose. It's both the system RAM and the VRAM. So Strix Halo is basically like it has 128 gigs of VRAM. And that's the reason why it can run the full AI model. That's crazy. So that's what's really cool about it. Now, the thing with DeepSeek, you can do multi-GPU. So if you have a 5090 and you have a power supply that can handle a 5090 plus a 4090, and you have a power supply that can do like, you know, that many 8-pin to 2x6 16 or 12 volt 2x6, you know what I'm saying? Like if you have a power supply, like let's say you have a 1600 watt power supply. If you have something like that and you can plug in a 5090 and a 4090, you can probably run the full model, because from my testing with the dual GPUs, I was able to run, well, I have to go back and look through my notes, but I was able to run it with dual graphics cards. So if you can't fit the full model on 32 gigs of VRAM, you could always just add your 4090 to the system and run, and you'll have like 32 plus 24. So if that's enough to fit, that'll probably be enough to fit. I don't know. I'm not 100% because I don't know how multi-GPU memory pools equate to like a unified memory architecture. So I don't know. I don't know. I think it treats it as like as a pool, but I could be wrong. I don't know. But that's a good question. So the HP ZBook, this one will have Strix Halo. The Asus ROG Flow Z13 2025 edition. This has Strix Halo in it as well. With, what is this? Full Thunderbolt. You got full Thunderbolt 4 on dual USB-C. I wish this wasn't a tablet, but the fact that it's a tablet means that they can get away with putting a larger battery for better battery life, because the keyboard part is not going to hold all the weight. So, but I don't know. Like, I'm not a big fan of this design where it's like a Nintendo Switch on a kickstand. I would rather them do a traditional laptop design. So that's why it's one of those where it's like, I'm probably going to wait and see like what other hardware manufacturers decide to do with Strix Halo, because Strix Halo has so much potential to create like a lot of cool mobility devices, not just standard laptops. Yeah. Yeah, so that's really interesting. The what was I gonna say about the? Oh yeah, so Strix Point is coming out in the Pro version. So for those that don't know what that is, basically this is for companies that are going to lease hundreds of laptops for all their employees, and they need remote management features for their IT to track the inventory of these devices, push software updates to these devices. That is what the AI Pro variant allows. It has more like hardware level security stuff for like the TPM and things like that. So Lenovo is launching, I think it's available now, the ThinkPad T14S with the Ryzen AI. So this is the Strix Point. This is not Strix Halo, because these are going to be like the thin and lights that go on airplanes. You know, like these are like business laptops and stuff like that. So that's coming out this year. So that's a really good one. And then Dell has announced. Oh, okay. And then speaking of Intel, Arrow Lake HX series is coming out this year as well. So Intel's going to refresh all of their gaming laptops with Arrow Lake. So all those 13th gen, was there even a 14th gen on laptop? I guess there was. It was very short-lived. So 14th gen, 13th gen, all that stuff is going to go away. No more laptops with those terrible things that burn up the battery instantly. So those are going to get replaced by Arrow Lake. Arrow Lake is looking pretty good on mobile. I think Arrow Lake is going to perform much better on mobile than it does on desktop. Can you fit 128 gigabytes into a laptop? You can on Strix Halo. So the ROG does have a 128 gig option. So the highest end ROG Flow Z13, this one has a retail price on Asus's website of $2,700 US. It comes with Windows 11 Pro. It comes with the Ryzen AI Max Plus. So let me zoom in. Let me make this larger. So it comes with the highest end 16 core, 32 thread with the AMD NPU with 50 TOPS NPU. And then it has a 1600p IPS, 180 hertz refresh, adaptive sync, Pantone validated, blah, blah, blah. Right there, 128 gigabytes of LPDDR5X. There you go. So yeah, Asus offers a 128 gigabyte version of the system, the unified memory. Yeah, it looks like HDMI, USB 4, all that stuff. $70 watt-hour battery. 200 watt power supply. Man, this thing is a beast. But here's the thing that's crazy. It has a 200 watt power supply and a 70 watt-hour battery. 4-cell battery, not 3-cell, 4-cell battery. The thing only weighs 1.2 kg. 1.2 kilograms, basically a little more than 2.5 pounds. That is so light for that much powerful hardware. That is crazy. Normally, when I think of this type of stuff, like 128 gigs of RAM and a 200 watt brick for the power supply, I think, oh man, it's going to be like a really chonky, heavy laptop, like a 5-pound laptop. Or like a 2.5K, or like a 2 kilogram, like well over 2 kilogram laptop. You know what I'm saying? Man, this thing, 1.2, what was it? 1.2 kilogram? 1.2 kilogram laptop. And it's super powerful. Still cheaper than the Astral. Yeah, I'm surprised this price. I thought they were going to be over 3,000. But this is only, it's a 13-inch. So, you know, like, this is actually reasonable. For a 128 gigabyte unified memory device that can beat, what are they saying? Like, this thing's faster than a 4060 laptop? It's like, it like rivals a 4070 mobile or something like that in gaming. That is really good. And it can do full DeepSeek locally. Yeah, this is incredible. So I just want to see like more than just this, because I don't really like the tablet form factor with the keyboard that attaches to it. I want like an actual laptop. Like I want the traditional clamshell laptop with one of these. Then they'll have my attention. Like then I'll actually be seriously considering upgrading my laptop to a Strix Halo this year. But until then, you know, like this is cool to look at, but yeah, this is definitely for a different user than someone like me. Yeah, the starting price is the same as the Founders Edition 5090. Yeah, the other one that I want to talk about was, did we talk about this? Okay, so for those of you that don't want a thin and light or a unified Strix Halo, if you're not going to do anything with AI, if you're someone who doesn't want anything to do with all this AI stuff, and you're in the market for a new laptop this year, you're probably going to be looking at a Ryzen 9000HX series or the 9000H X3D. So this year, we will see gaming laptops that feature an X3D variant as an option. So you can literally buy a laptop that has X3D gaming capability. So this one's not going to have any AI NPU. So there's no NPU. This is strictly going to be a traditional CPU that is meant to be paired up with a high-end mobile discrete graphics card. So think of this as the sort of laptops that will ship with RTX 5090 laptop version. So these are going to be, this is the fire range. It even says right here, Notebook OEM Dream Machines put out a press release which specifies that the first notebooks powered by the 9950X3D, HX3D will ship either toward the end of March or early April. Fire Range is known to have scored design wins from several popular notebook OEMs, which means the chips could have a good run at the market. So hopefully we'll see more of these, because I really think the X3D is going to really help push like AMD market share in the mobile space. Now, that remains to be seen, because Intel historically can outcompete AMD in mobile because they can manufacture way more CPUs than AMD. Now, we'll see what happens this year. Things might be different for Intel because they might not be able to get their typical volume this time around because they're dependent on TSMC to manufacture the various parts of their CPU, meaning they're no different from AMD this time around. So now they're going to be competing with AMD on more equal footing in terms of how much they can manufacture. So, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens this year in the mobile space. I think what we'll see is it's going to become more of a who actually has the better chip this year, rather than, oh, Intel wins by default because for every 1,000 AMD CPUs, Intel can make like 5x the amount because they just manufacture them themselves. They can't do that anymore. And that's why they want to get to 18 angstrom as soon as possible. 5090 laptop will have 24 gigabytes of VRAM. I think it was already leaked. The 5090 laptop is 24 gigs. But yeah, expect 5090 to be paired up with the 9955 HX3D in like a super high-end flagship gaming laptop this year. Yeah, Nero, that's a good point. It is hard to find. So, what I will tell you, Hawkpoint should be discounted this year. So if you're looking for, like, Hawkpoint is the Ryzen 8000, like the 8040 on mobile. You can probably find those discounted later this year once AMD rolls out the new, like once they get more volume, like once Fire Range comes out and we see more Strix Point business laptops come out. Strix Point's going to go into business laptops, and then AMD is going to launch Fire Range into the consumer market. As much as it would be nice to see like these CPUs in the professional, like the business class laptops, I don't expect to see these show up in business laptops. And I'm someone who only buys business laptops. Like, I don't use consumer laptops. I haven't used consumer laptops in many years. So I'm someone who will probably not purchase because I'm up for an upgrade this year for my laptop. But I'm someone who typically doesn't buy consumer grade laptops, so no gaming laptop for me. I'm gonna go with the business laptop instead, and that probably means I'm gonna be buying either Strix Point or Strix Halo if AMD can get the kind of business class workstation desktop replacement device that I would be interested in the business class laptop space. So I don't know if they're gonna do that. I know. Right now, I'm leaning more toward Strix Point. So I may end up getting a Strix Point instead of a Fire Range, because I don't know of any Fire Range coming to the business world. So I'm not really that interested in Fire Range. Although I know a lot of gamers, like a lot of people that watch this channel, are probably wanting a X3D laptop. So I can see this being a real hit. And a lot of people that watch this channel are probably not super enthusiastic about AI. So they don't care that these don't come with an NPU. For a lot of people that watch this channel, they probably think the NPU is a waste of silicon. And they'd rather have that be dedicated to either, better cores, more cache, X3D cache, for example, whatever. So ThinkPads have Ryzen AI processors available right now. Yeah. I'm actually considering upgrading or getting one of those ThinkPads. Did I have that on here? I thought there was. Yeah, didn't we show that on here? Dell? No, this one. Yeah, this one. I might actually get one of these guys. I'm thinking of getting one of these. The Lenovo ThinkPad T14S. The 8-core. Now, I know this is not the full Strix Point. This is like the 8-core one. This is the 360, not the 370. Which means this one probably comes with the integrated Radeon 880M instead of the 890M. So I may end up getting one of these just because it's a business class laptop. I don't think they're going to be doing the 890 and the 370. I could be wrong, but I don't know if they're going to do that in the ThinkPad. At least not in the first half of the year. So I may end up getting one of these. And I'm the type of person, like, I don't game on laptops. I just straight up don't game on laptops. So unless it's like Genshin Impact dailies or something, and I'm pretty sure an 880M can run Genshin Impact or Star Rail no problem at 1080p. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I don't really game, like, don't expect me to be like playing something like Hogwarts Legacy on a laptop because I don't do it. So this is the sort of thing that appeals to me. But for enthusiasts, I'm pretty sure you guys are probably more interested in either Strix Halo or the Fire Range, particularly Fire Range, because Fire Range is going to be in the new gaming laptops, and it's going to have an X3D option. Anything past 780M is very beefy for a laptop. Yeah, exactly. So here's the thing. Like, for me personally, the reason why I'm leaning more toward this, the AI7 360, whatever, the Pros 360, the reason why I'm leaning toward this is because what I value in a laptop is battery life and portability. This thing, it has to be less than 3 pounds, or it has to be less than 1.5 kilograms or 1.3 kilograms. It cannot weigh more than 1.35 kilograms. It cannot weigh more than 3 pounds. That is the maximum that I will accept for a laptop nowadays. And I want it to be 14 inches. Now, if I want a 16-inch laptop, that is where it needs to be like Strix Halo. So what I want to see from Lenovo, I want to see a Strix Halo in a 16-inch ThinkPad P series. So like a P1 or a P16 or a P16V, whatever the latest generation is, I want to see that from Lenovo with a Strix Halo with 128, minimum 96 gigabytes. Otherwise, I want 128 gigabytes of that unified system memory for that Strix Halo. Gaming laptop is useful for sim rig and yeah, but you know, like for me, I have so many like older desktop shells that I just throw some of the older hardware into that and I use that as the living room PC. But yeah, I don't have the portability. You're right. If you have it as a laptop form factor, you can disconnect it and move it around. So for me, the living room PC is more of like a static desktop. It's like an older desktop. But yeah, I'm really moving in the direction of getting a T14 with the Strix point because this thing, the fact that it's also 8 core means it'll have even better battery life than the full 12 core because there's less silicon that's consuming electricity. So yeah, this sort of thing is what I'm really looking at getting in the future. Probably something like this. Yeah. Yeah, but if you're going soldered RAM, that's how they get you to pay extra. But yeah, I would go with the 64 gigabytes of system memory if I was getting one of these. If I'm getting the T14, it's gonna come with 64 gigs of RAM. I'm gonna max out that LPDDR5X or CAM2 or whatever it is. But yeah, no, this one's got the soldered RAM. I'm pretty sure it's got the soldered. Yeah, 64 gigs. 64 gig LPDDR5X at 7500. So yeah, this is what I'll probably end up getting. Thunderbolt 4, just full Thunderbolt 4, HDMI 2.1. This is exactly what I need because I can use this. Oh, there is a 370 variant. Okay, that's interesting for the Pro series. Yeah. So, I want this because I already have a Thunderbolt docking station. I can just plug this in my Thunderbolt dock. That'll give me my 4K monitor and my two 1080p monitors. So I'll have triple monitors plus this monitor. So I'll have 4 screens. The laptop screen plus 3 external monitors. So yeah. It's probably due for me to start doing a little bit more content on like mobile devices, but yeah. I'm definitely leaning toward getting one of these. It's also not going to be stupid expensive like Strix Halo or any of those any of those laptops that have like 5090s in them are probably going to be like $3,000 or more. So this is probably going to be like under 2,000 maxed out with everything. That includes the soldered 64 gigabytes. The only offerings listing for current or have 32 gigs. No, doesn't it Lenovo have the I think they should have this. If you look on Lenovo's site, you should see T14S and in the article it says Gen 6. Gen 6 should have this. It's either going to be this or it's going to have Snapdragon. There's a Snapdragon, and then there's the Ryzen AI. There's 2 different choices. You either get Snapdragon or you get Ryzen AI. They want 2,000 for the current Ryzen AI T14S. Really? Is that with or without discount? Yeah. Well, the point is, like, this is the sort of thing that I probably would end up upgrading to because I'm on a really old laptop. So now, okay, to clarify, this would not be replacing my P15V. My P15V, I still would use that. That is my desktop replacement. This would be replacing my very old A485. So I always operate with 2 laptops. One is a thin and light for travel. Like, for example, guys, when I went to Japan, I take my small thin and light 14-inch with me on the airplane. I don't lug around the big desktop replacement laptop. I'm not taking that with me. That thing requires a beefy charger. First of all, Japan doesn't even have the 3-prong. You're stuck on the 2. So if your charger needs the 3rd prong, you have to go and buy an adapter, so that adds more complexity. So yeah, no. Like, this thing can be charged off of a USB-C. So I would definitely take a thin and light if I'm traveling overseas, for example. So, yeah. So currently, does this even have an article? They don't even have an article. It's so old. Yeah, my old laptop is from 2018. That will be replaced by this, most likely. This thing. At some point. The build your own. Yeah, it should have a 64 gigabyte. That's good. See, here's the thing, guys. If you're going to buy a ThinkPad, you got to find the discount codes. You got to scour the internet for the discount codes. Because Lenovo's MSRP is always a joke. You always put in the discount codes to reduce the price. So, like, if it's, for example, if it's like $2,500, you put in a 40% off code and it, like, drops it under $2,000. That's what you got to do when it comes to buying Lenovo. It's stupid. I don't understand why Lenovo operates like that compared to like Dell or HP. But Lenovo is just kind of silly when it comes to the discounting. But anyway, that's, yeah. I'm familiar with buying ThinkPads. It's annoying because you got to go and search the internet for the discount codes. And they change them all the time. So you got to find the one that's like 45% off or whatever. You put that in their little coupon code thing, and it drops the price a ton. And I think the codes might stack, too, but not all of them do. So you have to do your research if you're buying one of these. Anyway, so that covers mobile. Let's talk about Monster Hunter, and then we'll probably end the stream. So, Monster Hunter Wilds, the benchmark is out. If you score over 20,000, they claim that you have excellent performance. They give an example here of somebody with a 1080p resolution. They're playing the graphics on high preset, which means that they're using upscaling, which means that this is actually not native 1080p. This is like sub 1080 upscaled to 1080p. And then they're using an Intel i7-13700KF and a GeForce 4060 Ti. And they've got 64 gigabytes of system memory. And they scored 84.6 frames per second. I can tell you right now, that is very sad. That is not good. Considering that the resolution is sub 1080 and it's upscaled using DLSS. Now, they're not using FrameGen. This says FrameGen turned off. Otherwise, it would say FrameGen here. But natural frame rate, 84 frames per second at sub 1080 on high preset. Not ultra. This is high, and it's sub 1080. And they're scoring 84 FPS with a 4060 Ti. This indicates that this game is going to be incredibly hard to run without FrameGen. So you can download it here. The system requirements are as follows, and this is where I don't understand who at Capcom signed off on this. So the minimum system requirements, you must have, the bare minimum is going to be a Intel i5 from 2020 or an AMD Ryzen 5 from 2019. Keep that in mind. These are old CPUs. We just talked about the 3, 5, and 7-year lifespan. These guys are already falling into that 5-year lifespan. So these things are really old now. 16 gigs of system memory, GTX 1660 with 6 GB. Does this have 6 gigabytes of VRAM? 6 gigabytes of, I thought this had 4. I guess it has 6. And a Radeon 5500 XT. Does this have 8 gigs of VRAM? I thought this had like 4 gigs of VRAM. Oh, maybe it did have 8. Anyway, you need at minimum 6 gigabytes of VRAM for 30 frames per second at 1080p resolution. And you need, it's saying 6 or more VRAM required and 75 gigabytes of system storage. SSD required. You cannot install this on a hard drive. This game is expected to run at 1080p. Upscaled from 720p native resolution. that will achieve 30 frames per second on the lowest graphics settings. Direct storage is supported. So this is so misleading because this should literally be relabeled as 720p. 720p 30 requires this sort of specs. Now let's look at recommended. 1080p 60 with frame gen enabled. So now we've got frame gen turned on. Same exact CPUs, same exact RAM. The only difference is now they've bumped the GPU up to an RTX 2060 Super. And this is incorrect because doesn't the Super have 6 gigs of VRAM, not 8? Last I checked, this is 6 gigabytes of VRAM. Now they're saying 8 gigabytes or more required, and an RX 6600 with 8 gigs of VRAM. Yeah, the beta is out. You want me to try it right now? We're going to be doing lots of live streams this weekend. Lots of different systems. I'm going to list all the different GPUs and CPUs that we will be live streaming on, just like we did back in November. This time around, we're going to be covering a lot of different graphics cards on stream. So if you want to see how a whole bunch of different graphics cards and CPUs handle this game, you're going to want to tune in this Saturday and this Sunday and tomorrow evening. We're going to be doing a lot of live streams. We're going to be doing them in like 45-minute blocks. So I'll start a stream, 45 minutes, then the stream will go offline, then like 15 minutes, we're back up running on a different computer. It's going to be going back to back. We're going to be changing out GPUs. It's going to be crazy. So we're going to be seeing a lot of different test systems for this game because this is my most anticipated game of the year. So we are going to be testing a lot of different hardware configurations for this game. So, this is 1080p upscaled from some resolution that's less than 1080p with medium graphics settings, frame gen turned on. You can get 1080p 60 with these specs. High. Here we go, 1440p, 60 frames per second with frame gen. The CPUs don't change, but the GPUs keep going up. Now they have a 4060 Ti and a 6700 XT 12 gig. They're saying 8 gigs or more are required for the VRAM for the 1440p. The game is expected to run at 1440p 60 with frame gen under the high settings. Alright, then finally Ultra. The 4K experience. This is how I personally will be playing the game. It'll be at 4K resolution. So 4K, here we go. 60 frames per second with frame gen enabled. Now here's where things get really interesting. For some reason, Capcom, in all their infinite wisdom, decided to keep the CPUs exactly the same from minimum all the way up to 1440p high. Like, I don't know why they did that. Because this game, the most critical component for this game is going to be your CPU. The CPU is going to be the most important component unless you're playing at 4K. Yet for some reason, magically, when you click on this Ultra tab, they're like, oh, you need like way better CPUs to handle this game compared to all the other ones. So 4K, even though at 4K, the CPU still matters in this title a lot, but the GPU also matters at 4K. Now, according to Capcom, for 4K, 60 FPS is obtainable with frame gen enabled if you have either a Intel Core i5 from 2021 or an AMD Zen 3 from 2020 or a Zen 4 from 2022. So basically they're saying you have to have either an 11th or 12th gen Intel with DDR4, or you need to have an AMD Zen 3 with DDR4 or a Zen 4 with DDR5 minimum to handle the game at 4K with the frame gen for 60 FPS. I don't know why it's still only 16 gigs of system memory. I don't understand that. That sounds hilarious. That's completely misleading. I don't even consider 16 gigabytes relevant for a computer in 2025. This is like way too low on RAM. And then the GeForce. So what's funny is a computer should never have the RAM and the VRAM should never be equal. There should always be more system RAM than VRAM, because that, like, can you imagine somebody building a computer with an RTX 5090 with 32 gigs of VRAM, but their system RAM is like 16 gigs of RAM? Like, that sounds so backwards on so many levels. Anyway, GeForce RTX 4070 Ti and 4070 Ti Super. I don't understand why they even bother listing two different NVIDIA cards that are... Why did they do this? And then Radeon 7800 XT with 16 gigs of VRAM. And then, okay, now, okay, so they're basically saying if you want high resolution texture, you need to have 16 gigabytes of VRAM minimum. And this is the reason why the 5080 sounds like a bad deal, because here we are, the 5080 isn't even a month old yet, and you already have a game saying you have to have a minimum of 16 gigs when the high resolution texture pack is turned on. So otherwise 12. So this is the reason why the 5080 is kind of dead on arrival. So, and then 75 gigs, 150 gigabyte when installing. So you basically need 150 gigabytes of storage if you want to install the free, they indicate that it's free, obviously it's free, high resolution texture pack DLC. This is no different from how they handled Monster Hunter World. And then SSD, blah, blah, blah. Okay, the game is expected to run at 2160p, aka 4K, upscaled 60 FPS with frame gen enabled under the ultra graphics settings. This is interesting. They're saying that you can run this game on the ultra graphics preset at 4K resolution with these GPUs, provided you have upscaled capability, meaning you're running DLSS or FSR3 and you run frame gen enabled. So this is going to be a game that I can see the hardcore audience of the Monster Hunter franchise is still going to play it, no problem. They're not going to complain. Some of them might complain about the hardware specs being so high, but I can see it now. As I'm speaking, there are probably like Steam forum threads on this game right now complaining about how the game performs like garbage, and the person complaining typically has a 4-year-old CPU or maybe even a 5-year-old CPU at this point, and they have like a much more recent GPU, but the reality is they're CPU bound. So, yeah. I personally think that this is the sort of game, because this game is using RE Engine, this game is just as hard to run as Dragon's Dogma 2. Dragon's Dogma 2 was the most CPU-bound game I have ever played throughout last year. Like, there wasn't a single game that I can think of that came out last year that was more CPU-bound or more CPU-demanding than Dragon's Dogma 2. That game took the crown of the most CPU-bound game. And that's because it is an open world that leverages Capcom's fantastic RE engine. But now we're starting to see that RE engine has trouble scaling beyond a linear type game. Because if you think of RE engine, you look at Resident Evil 4 Remake, Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil 3 Remake. All those Resident Evil games ran really, really well on this kind of hardware, even at maxed out settings. But those were single player games that were linear, contained environments. They were small, relatively speaking, they were small game environments, not big open world with lots of NPCs, with other players if you're playing online, kind of like an MMO. You know, this is a completely different animal for Capcom to tackle with their RE engine. And if Dragon's Dogma 2 was any indicator of scaling issues, I'm not talking about upscaling, I'm talking about the ability of a game engine to scale the number of NPCs, the number of dynamically rendered environments as you run through the world. Capcom has shown that the RE engine has it requires a very, very high-end CPU to be able to not be giving you poor performance. So the CPU is going to absolutely be the most important component of the computer when you play this game. So I personally think that they're saying FrameGen is required because they know that their engine struggles with high NPC count and lots of dynamic events happening. It pegs the CPU very heavily. And I guess they're trying to balance thread utilization so the CPU is not overwhelmed. And because of that, you get relatively low frame rate even with super high-end GPUs. It's basically a CPU bottleneck game. So this is going to be an insanely CPU bottleneck game. So here's what we're going to do. I just realized it's going to be so CPU heavy. We are going to be streaming the game this weekend, starting tomorrow, with the following hardware. So if you want to see how the game performs on the following, this is what you can expect to see. Threadripper 7960X plus RTX 4090. We will be covering that one on one stream in one 30-minute, 45-minute interval. We'll be covering the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K plus 7900 XTX. Okay. And then, I don't know if we need to include this one. Maybe we will, just for completion. So we'll compare these two, because these two CPUs are rival CPUs as far as I'm concerned. So we'll keep the GPU the same for both. So I don't have to do anything there. Then for all the other tests, we will be using the Ryzen 7 9800 X3D. This will be covering Intel's B580. It will be covering the, B580, 7900 XTX, RTX 3090 Ti will be making a rare appearance in one of the live streams, paired up with the 9800 X3D, RTX 3080 Ti will also, I have just decided that my paperweight, I literally show off some time on stream, that will be used on one of the live streams with the 9800 X3D. So we'll be doing this. It's 4. So it's 1, 4, 5, 6. So that's like 7 live streams. B580's in there? Yeah. I think this is it. I'm pretty sure we're going to be CPU bottlenecked in all scenarios. I don't think we're going to be... Okay, I think at 4K, all tests will be 2160p. We'll be testing 4K. 4K. With the one exception being the Intel B580. Intel B580, we will still be playing the game at 4K, but we'll probably be running it at like XESS balanced or something, or maybe FSR3 frame gen or whatever. I'll have to figure it out. We're going to be doing B580 again. Not with Intel because I can't do my quick sync, so I'm going to have to pair it up with AMD. So I can use the media engine on the 9800X3D to render the stream so that I don't overwhelm this thing like we did last time, so we can get accurate results out of it. But yeah, these are the ones that we're going to be covering. Trying to think, is there anything else? Oh, we may do Ryzen 9. Okay, these are like the mandatory ones. These are the mandatory streams. Optional stream configurations would be Ryzen 9 7950 X3D plus RTX 4080 Super. This may make a rare appearance. And then possibly the Core i9 13900K plus the 7900 XT might make another extremely rare appearance. So these are going to be the games. The game is extremely CPU heavy. I think it's going to be very CPU bound in all scenarios except the situation where we try to do like 1440p on a B580. We will have to leverage frame gen for all of these. I can already tell. Except maybe 4090. 4090 at 4K can probably do... yeah, this one I've already tested, so I already know. Spoiler alert, in my mind, I already tested this, so I already know how this performs. And I already know how this performs. And I think I did this one. These are the ones I have not done. So these will be... I'll be going in blind on the streams. I have no idea how the 3090 Ti handles this game. I have no idea how the 3080 Ti or the B580 or like how much of an uplift I get with the XTX when I pair it up with the fastest gaming CPU. Monster Hunter Wilds may be the reason to upgrade that to that if there's a notable difference. There probably won't be. It doesn't use that many cores, but it is still very CPU heavy. It is very CPU bound. Here's the thing, guys. You can tell if a game is CPU heavy. A game is CPU heavy if the utilization exceeds 20%. If your CPU is going over 20%, that means it is probably CPU bound and the game is using a ton of CPU. It's using way more CPU than it needs. Typically, a game should use no less than 10%. Typically, a game should use less than 10% of the CPU. If a game is using more than 20% CPU, meaning if you play a game and you're seeing your CPU averaging over 20%, that means it's using a ton of CPU. And that means it is very stressful on the CPU. So you don't want CPU utilization to exceed 20% if you're playing a game, typically. Because if you go over 20%, that means you're hitting a CPU bound somewhere. So we'll be looking at that. We will be observing this because we've already looked at this. GPU should be at 99% or 100%. Well, okay, typically 99%. 95 to 100% utilization is the ideal for a game. Meaning you want 10% or less on CPU and you want 95% or more on GPU. That is how you know if you are GPU bound or CPU bound. If it's more than 20% and your GPU is less than 95%, guess what? You're CPU bound. You're CPU bound. That's how you can tell if it's a CPU bound scenario versus a GPU bound scenario. Okay, CPU is 7950X. 128 gigabytes of system memory. That's a lot of RAM. 4090 MSI. Okay, yeah. Did I put my... There. So you guys can see how this will be tested. I can probably give one of these 96. I could do this with 96, but we're going to run this at 8,000. We're going to max out the 9800 X3D. We're going 48 gigs at 8,000 for the maximum speed. We're going to try to eliminate the CPU bottleneck for these GPUs as much as possible. This is going to be known as the Monster, we'll just say, upcoming Monster Hunter Wilds Open Beta Streaming Marathon. There. So that people that are tuning in right now, they know what we're talking about. All tests will be 2160p. Yeah. And then these are the systems. So we're going to be using 1, 2, 3, 4 different PCs. And if I have enough time, I will try to include maybe this one and maybe this one. If people really, really want to see the 7950 X3D plus a 4080 Super and or the rare 13900K. I say rare, but that's because I barely use it. I'll have to put an SSD in it. It literally has nothing in it. And the 7900 XT. Like, if you want to see these, I already streamed these back in November. There are literal like live streams of me testing those last November. So if the build of the, let's put it this way, I will try to include those two test systems if the beta is different from the one in November. If it's exactly the same build from November, I don't know if I'll bother to test these two because I don't really see the point because I already have tested them, if that makes sense. Now, we've already tested Threadripper back in November with the 4090, but people were interested in seeing Threadripper and the 4090 on stream again, so we'll just do it just because, like, people are kind of interested in that. And then I did not test Intel Core Ultra 9. Back in November, I tested the Intel Core Ultra 7. So now we'll see if the Core Ultra 9 makes any difference. And we'll be testing with the exact same GPU, the AMD reference card 7900 XTX with the Intel Core Ultra 9. And then we'll be using the Tech Thursdays PC. Maybe, I may not use this one, but just for completion, just to compare to Core Ultra 9, we probably will, because I consider these two like rival CPUs. So we'll probably do that because I think that's a good CPU comparison. Same GPU for both, so it's relatively easy. And then every other GPU test will be done with the fastest gaming CPU, with the fastest memory that I have. So that's what we're going to do. So expect this to start tomorrow, tomorrow evening, I guess. Yeah. We'll be doing a Friday evening. We'll be doing like a Saturday live stream, a Saturday evening live stream, and I guess a Sunday, and maybe Sunday evening. There'll be at least 5 live streams, all in quick succession, at least. We'll be doing Threadripper tomorrow, most likely. And then we'll probably do... I might do all 3 of these tomorrow to get them out of the way. And then Saturday, we'll be doing all the GPUs. And I don't know what I'll do Sunday. Sunday may probably be these guys. Who knows? That might be the schedule. So just to give people an idea of like what happens if someone wants to play this game on a workstation, like a super high-end workstation, quad channel memory, RTX 4090. Like what is that going to look like? And then that'll be the very first one. So if you really want to see that, make sure you tune in at the first notification of the live stream, because the first one's going to be 4090 and Threadripper. We're going to kick things off big with those, and then we're going to switch to one of these 2. Either Tech Thursdays, this is the system I'm on right now, or we're going to use the Intel Core Ultra. All of these will be tested with the 4K OLED. My 4K OLED will be on those. Actually, the Intel will also be on 4K OLED. Intel Core Ultra. Basically, I'm going to have to pull the Intel out and put this one in, because these are my Asus motherboards. My Crosshair and my Maximus are those 2. There's literally one over there, and the one is like right behind me right now. I got to move it over there if I'm going to use the OLED. And then these are in their own spots, so we don't have to worry about those for now. So yeah, that's going to be it, guys. So that's probably it for the live stream.
Is boost clock for 9800X3D under D15 air cooling at 5300 MHz too low? Should I repaste my CPU?
No, it's probably like 5.3 something. So it's almost 5.4. No, that sounds right. That's right. I mean, you'll see how mine performs. Mine's also on an air cooler. I think I'm on the exact same air cooler, the D15. So you can compare to mine. I'll have the overlay up when we're testing these for the temperature. I may have to use Harbor Info to get the temperature. But yeah. I don't think that, to me, that looks normal. The default limits to that unless you increase the Fmax or set the static multiplier. Well, don't use the static multiplier. Don't do that. All you gotta do, turn PBO on, set PBO to enabled, advanced, and then do plus 200 megahertz on the Fmax thing, and then do, I guess, like CO negative 10 or whatever, if you don't want to use Curve Shaper. But you can technically use Curve Shaper to get better. And if you do per core, you can get even better tuning out of it. But it depends on like how much time you want to spend doing that. You're preparing to build a PC with 9950X, 192 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, that'll work. 5200 DDR5 will work at 192. That's easy with the newer motherboard and with the Zen 5. 5090 TC. That is a very high-end system. Do you think this Aorus will handle the setup? Yes, I mean, it will. You said X870. What is the X870 Aorus? Aorus Elite? It's a non-E, which means it's like a single chipset. Most likely that's fine. 192 gigabytes, 5200. That's not hard. Especially since it's X870 and it's Zen 5. So, yeah. CPU 7950X 670E-E 128 gigs. Man, all these people running so much RAM. What are you guys doing with all that RAM? That is so much system RAM. 128 gigabytes. You want to use it as a workstation and oh, you're using it as a workstation? So that much RAM can run at 5200. Just saying. It's gonna be hard to go beyond that though. Yeah, it depends. Like if that's a 128 gigabyte kit that's like 4800, then don't even mess with it. It's probably Micron. You want to do this game would like your help picking up an LED monitor to play Monster Hunter. I don't know. I don't know what monitor to recommend. If you're not going OLED, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you because I only really recommend OLED at this point. OLED is the easiest on the eyes. It has the most clear motion fluidity, motion clarity. It's a 4K OLED. Text readability is totally fine at 4K resolution. Regardless of whether you're doing 32-inch OLED or 27-inch OLED, both are fine. Yeah, I don't know. I guess, like, the only one that I can tell you is the Sony InZone M9 that I'm using as my IPS. I don't know. Alright, guys, but that's probably going to be it. You have an ASRock 360Hz OLED waiting at home. It just came out. Okay, well, yeah, but he's saying no OLED. Like, I don't know what to tell you except get, like... I don't know, just get like, a good IPS monitor, then, if you don't want an OLED. X870 Aorus Elite. Yeah, that'll work. Guys, 128, 192 is not hard if you are just running it at regular JEDEC speeds, like 5200 or 4800. It's only hard if you're going to do like 6000. That's the only time it's hard. So I wouldn't worry about that. The motherboard doesn't matter too much if you're running it at like 5200. The motherboard only matters if you're trying to like take 2 sticks of memory and run that RAM at like a ridiculously high speed, like 8000. Then the motherboard matters. Alright, that's going to be it for this stream. We will be back tomorrow with the Monster Hunter Wilds streaming extravaganza. We're going to try to cover Threadripper, Core Ultra 9, and the Ryzen 9, all on within the same 15 minutes of each other. So I need to remember not to get too carried away and spend like 2 hours on one PC. So I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be probably my favorite game of the year, unless Ninja Gaiden 4. I highly doubt Ninja Gaiden 4 can top this game. It's either going to be between this and Claire Obscure Expedition 33 for my personal game of the year 2025. So looking forward to it. Expect to see a lot of Monster Hunter next month especially. But if you want to see how the game performs on a whole bunch of different graphics cards, a whole bunch of different CPUs, stay tuned for this weekend, and I'll see you guys then. Thanks for watching, and if those of you that are new to the channel, we do these Tech Thursday live streams every Thursday. So tune into those. The starting time is 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific time, or I guess 8 p.m. Central and 7 p.m. Mountain Time in the continental U.S. We do it every Thursdays. You can ask questions live, whether they're tech-related, gaming-related, whatever. Yeah, and that's basically it. And then we do the live streams on the weekend for the gaming side of the house, because this is technically a gaming and hardware tech channel. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I will see you guys this weekend playing Monster Hunter Wilds on the open beta. Until then, take care, and I'll see you next Thursday as well on Tech Thursdays. See you then. Thanks.